This is the D6 generation with your hosts, Craig Gallant.
No, cut that. Keep that. Someday it's going to be worth something.
Russ Wakeland.
You put me in an ATST with frickin' Wookiees attacking me and whatnot?
Now you're talking.
And Stuart Mackaness in the third chair.
Clarity of thought before rashness of action.
With contributions from Total Fangirl
Vampires do not sparkle.
and our loyal listeners.
Crazy? That's like 400 hours of gamer nonsense.
Welcome to another edition of Rapid Fire, the roundtable discussion of all things gaming. Go to these with the speed of a crazed, evil-powered equine jet bike flying across the arid desert.
Ooh.
Today's edition is brought to you by all of our friends at Patreon who help us keep the lights on, those men and women who step up and join us in the fray. Tonight, I would like to thank Duncan Allen, Patrick Allen, John Armstrong, Ian Spooky Arvizo, and Loquacious B. I'm Geek Living Nerd again, your host. Today, our panelists are Russ, John Ware, Wakeland, and a very special guest, Stuart Bat Masterson McInnes, GM of Wayland Games and Chief Imaginator at Warcradle Studios. Let's begin. Issue number 1. The term rebooting in narratology is defined as the restarting of a series storyline, discarding all previous continuity in favor of a new narrative. Some, indeed much of the original, might still exist in one form or another, but only insofar as it serves the new story. Question. What is considered to be the worst movie reboot of all time by moviegoers, entertainment journalists, and industry insiders alike? Raymond LaRoque Ross.
Recently, it's all the Disney ones. They're terrible.
Masala Severus Stewart.
No, I'd say it's got to be Lost in Space, surely.
Ooh, that was pretty bad.
Oh, those Disney hate I don't get from Wakeland. Lost in Space was definitely sketchy, but you are both forgetting the shot-for-shot, line-for-line, inflection-for-inflection remake of the Alfred Hitchcock masterpiece Psycho.
He did.
No.
Why
Yes.
would anyone spend the time and effort? Well, anyway, that makes you sadly both wrong. Issue number 2. Nearly all the world agrees Game of Thrones is one of the most highly regarded television series of all time, taking George R.R. Martin's sprawling fantasy epic A Song of Ice and Fire and condensing its scope and focus to a much more manageable level. The show still is able to tell an epic story that spans centuries, continents, and worlds from one episode to the next. Question. So far in Season 7, what was the highest rated episode according to Rotten Tomatoes aggregator, and what was the percentage of positive online reviews for that episode? Ewan, Ray, and Russ.
I'm going to say it was the last episode of the second season at 85%.
Mark Stanley Stewart.
I would say it is the... I reckon it's got to be the first episode of the third season, and I would say 89%.
Interesting. The question was, to reiterate, so far in Season 7,
that
was the highest rated. So right off the bat, you're both wrong.
I thought that's what you said, but then
See, you fell for it, Stuart. I dragged you down.
When I heard Russell go all wacky on me, and I thought, oh, poor Stuart is going to be let off the
guest.
That would be Season 7, Episode 2, Stormborn, with 100% positive reviews online.
Wow. That's
Now, you see, that's what I was going to say. This is done.
Exactly.
It's so humiliating.
The whole thing doesn't even count. Issue number 3. The meaning of the word luck varies by the philosophical, religious, mystical, and emotional context of the ones interpreting it, but it is generally defined as success or failure apparently brought about by chance rather than through one's own actions. One never wishes to win a game of skill by pure luck. Question. On a scale of 1 through 10, with 1 being a head wound via falling horseshoe and 10 being a slip on a banana peel into a tank of money, how much luck is too much luck in a miniatures game? Random Russ.
I'm going to say a 13.
And Stray Stewart.
7 for me.
7. Interestingly enough, I'm going to roll a die. And the answer was a 6. Oh, too bad. You both lost. And you're both wrong. Issue number 4. Few people don't enjoy a good genre mashup from time to time. If the sci-fi gets boring, you've got the mystery. If the fantasy starts to grind, you've got the musical numbers, right, Russ? And if the horror-fueled mystical shamanism gets too steampunky, you've got the root and toot and rowdiness of the Wild West to fall back on. Question. What is the ideal number and ratio of source genres in a classic mashup? I Really Like You, New Romantics, Russ.
I'm going to go with 6.
Shower and Spark Stewart.
There's got to be 3, surely.
Again, the question was the ideal number and the ratio. So at most, both of you would have 50% of that. Russ is completely wrong. And I'm going with 3, carefully divided as 40-40-20, such as 40% Wild West, 40% sci-fi, and 20% floral arranging, which I'm just not going to give either of you even partial credit on that one.
That's
so you're all
Firefly,
wrong.
isn't it?
That is Firefly, indeed. Thanks for listening, and good night.
This episode of the D6 Generation is brought to you by
Battle Foam, protecting your army so you don't have to.
And the War Store, bringing the war to your door since 1999, and that is for a decade or more.
Hello!
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, and
Hello.
welcome to episode 219, Craig.
The big number,
It's
Russ,
getting
big
there.
number.
Of the D6 Generation. I'm Russ Wakeland.
I am Craig Gallant.
And I am Stuart Mackaness.
Hey, Stuart!
Stuart!
We are so excited to have Stuart on the show. Stuart, of course, from Wayland Games and Warcradle Studios. Stuart, thank you so much for joining us on our little show here. Really appreciate you taking time out.
No.
There you-
Thanks for having me here.
And of course, Stuart is the new steward, if you will, of Wild West Exodus. And so, of course, a project near and dear to my heart. So we're going to talk a lot about that over the course of the show. And, of course, something that's happening a lot in miniatures games and games in general, Russ. What are we talking about in the other part of the show?
We're going to talk a little bit of mulling mechanics, Craig. It's been a little while since we mulled those mechanics. We're going to talk a bit about mitigating luck. What are some mechanics that game designers put into their games to help make the luck not quite so lucky, as it were?
Right. So we're going to mull them. We're going to warm them up and
Spices.
put wine and some spices. Excellent.
Exactly.
Sounds good.
All right. But before we get to all that, first we should talk about, actually we ran into Stuart at Dunkin' Donuts not too long ago. And
I remember.
and Stuart,
I remember as if it was yesterday.
do you recall,
Indeed.
Do you recall what we talked about, Stuart, when we were in the donut shop there?
I did, yes. I mean, it's so long ago and yet so contemporary and timely at the same time. Yeah.
Right. So do you recall at all what it was? I mean, can you tell our listeners?
I do. Sorry, would you like me to say? Yes, we spoke of Game of Thrones.
We did speak. Season 7 is, if I remember correctly, and it is, of course, spoiler filled. So warning.
It is spoilerific.
But if you'd like to hear our thoughts, just 3 gamers hanging out in a donut shop talking about the latest season and how we're enjoying it through episode 4. Craig, what would be the best way to get one of our lost chapters there for this extra bit of content?
Well, the best way to get that, Russ, would be to go to patreon.com and put in the D6 Generation, avoid the little video that explains what we're doing, and just kick in a tip, $2 or more per episode. Will get you the entire library of lost chapters completely unlocked at your disposal at your convenience. You could also go to the d6generation.com, click on the little Patreon link on the right-hand side, and that will bring you directly to that page. The rest of the path remains the same.
Exactly right. And also, we have the big news, 2 bits of news. By the time this show goes live, there will be 2 dates that are closing in so rapidly that if you don't react immediately, you will miss out. One of them is...
It'll be the end.
One of them is our Play by Mob at Gen Con 2017 is literally only days away as we record this. So when this show goes live, you will have only a couple days left to sign up and join the event. It is 100% free, so if you happen to be at Gen Con and you're not doing anything exciting on Thursday, you could do much worse than sitting down at our little event at Thursday night from 8 to 11 or so, or 10, whatever it is, and listen to us rattle on. You be a part of the show, participate in achievements in gaming, talk about some of the cool stuff at Gen Con, and then, of course, join our crazy Play by Mob event. And if you listen to past episodes, you'll know just how crazy those things can get.
I do believe this is going to be another 2 giveaway suitcase prize suitcases event. So.
In fact, this one's so big that I have to fly separately, and my family's driving the car just to carry all the stuff. That's how crazy this is going to be. So
that's right.
We're going to have
a trailer,
a literally vehicle filled with things to give away. So the prizes are just stupid amounts of prizes. So please, we hope to see you there. Love to say hi to everybody. And it's the one place at Gen Con we are guaranteed to run into Craig, myself, and my wife, Nicole, total fangirl, all in one spot there. Of course, we're at Gen Con all weekend. We hope to see you there. But for a guaranteed Craig sighting, as it were, you want to be there as well. So also, Craig, we have another thing closing in on its deadline, which is really pretty much almost the same exact day as our thing here, which is on the 15th of August is your last chance to participate in winning one of Craig's brand new audiobooks, Legacy of Shadow, right?
That's right. Courtesy of Ray Greenlee, the voiceover champ who narrated the book.
Yes.
We're looking for, it's a Twitter contest, right? And what are you tweeting?
Well, you need to tweet, you have to include at Ray Greenlee voiceover, VO, and you have to include hashtag D6G Pick Me and hashtag Legacy of Shadows, and you need to include the name and description of a new alien race that would fit nicely into Craig's universe there. So these are a lot of things to do in order to make that pull off. So please get all that together. It's hard to squeeze it in there, but I think you can do it.
Yep. We have faith in you.
We do.
And the prize is 5 audio copies of the book, so that should be exciting.
Excellent.
5. So, well, you don't get 5 yourself.
No.
You get
5 different people will win
winners.
and get 5. Each get one code for a copy.
So August 15th. So, Stuart, if you want a copy of this book, be sure you tweet to at D6G Pick Me to get yourself one of those as well.
There you
Sounds great, but I can only win the one copy. I can't dual wield a couple of them.
No, you can't dual wield.
I mean, I'm sure there's a universe in which that would work and make sense.
Maybe you want one for each earbud. Maybe you need to.
That's true. 2 different earbuds. That would be like double stereo.
I have 2 different ears, so that works out well.
It does work out. So, Craig,
go.
What's the time now for, Craig?
It's time for me to reach over here and say, Achievements in Gaming.
It is indeed. And, of course, Achievements is brought to us by all of our fine friends over at Patreon. So this is a part of the show we talk about what we've been playing lately. Up first is sort of those good old-fashioned pencil, paper, board game type stuff. Stuart, what
miniature games.
And miniature gaming. Stuart, what have you been playing lately?
A board game / miniature game. I've been playing Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition.
Fantastic. Now how are you enjoying... Now, did you play 1st Edition?
Yes.
You did. And are you enjoying 2nd Edition?
I'm loving 2nd Edition.
Now, what is improved in 2nd Edition over 1st Edition?
Almost everything, which is true of many 2nd Editions over 1st Editions. It uses an app, and normally I really don't like gadgety type things, like gimmicky things that you kind of add onto the board game. But it's not only is it integral to the way the game works, it's really atmospheric. And obviously, a game like Mansions of Madness, where it's all about Cthulhu,
right?
You need a bit of a Lovecraftian atmosphere generation. So it's a fantastic, really well done job by Fantasy Flight Games, and I'm really hoping they do like a 2nd edition for Imperial Assault and do something like that with that, because that would be awesome.
I'm kind of hoping for a 3rd edition of Descent, because I love Descent. I have all the stuff, but Imperial Assault was so much better with the way the interactive turns work and everything that I really want. I really want that. Now, let me ask you this though, because the original Mansion of Madness was a Overlord / players thing, so it wasn't really co-op. It was multi versus one, right? Does the app make it pure co-op, or does the app enhance everybody's experience, including the Overlord?
No. There is no Overlord. The app is the Overlord in 2nd edition.
It becomes pure co-op.
It is co-op.
Yeah. Okay.
Except obviously when you go insane and then secretly try and slit the throats of the other investigators.
Ooh, see, that's fun. I like that. So it's got a little Betrayal House on the Hill thing going on there.
Oh yeah. In fact, we had a game not so long ago where we're all going well, but one of the guys he's lost all of his sanity, so he's gone crazy, and he's picked up a psychosis, and it's all getting a bit fraught, and the dock's on fire, and the town's burning, and the villagers are getting rowdy, and suddenly one of the players goes, "Oh no, wait, Han, I've got just the right idea on what to do," and he goes, "Quick, give me give me your knife," and the guy asked to do it is this kind of hobo character who then gets his dog, because he's got a dog that he can send off to pass objects to people. So the hobo guy goes off, gives the knife to the dog, the dog runs over to to the character who's strangely decided he wanted this knife.
Right.
The dog lovingly gives the knife to the slightly deranged investigator. The investigator then walks back over to the hobo and slits the hobo's throat. So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is hardcore. I love it. That sounds great. I'll have to check that out.
It's a dark game. It's great.
Oh, I
really
like.
good.
See, I like that. So, what else are you playing, Stuart?
I've got this. I've got this man cave full of all sorts of things. So, because I've got a couple of young children, there's my gaming is either things that I enjoy playing with friends, but I do play an inordinate number of games that are maybe slightly outside of my comfort zone. So, I've just started for my daughter. We've started playing Tales of Equestria, which is the My Little Pony role-play game, and that's not as terrible as you might imagine. So Alessio Calvatore has earned a royalty check for doing that one.
Nice. Well, it's funny because my girls were big My Little Pony fans, and they were into the card game, that came out a few years ago.
Yeah.
But they just got a little past, and they're into role-playing games. We like Dungeons & Dragons, but they just got a little old for the My Little Pony RPG. But it was right on the edge. You could tell they're kind of looking at it, and they're like, that's cool, but we're a little too old for it. But it looks good. I was flipping through it. Like, they have, all the classes and everything. It's a pretty cool.
They do, yeah. It's kind of cool, and you get to pick your cutie mark for the backside of your pony, and you get to come up with a cool name, and contrary to what you probably would have thought, being an earth pony, so in other words, not having wings or not being a unicorn, doesn't suck. You actually do get benefits for being. It's like being a human in D&D. Yeah, right. It isn't the not elf, not dwarf, not orc character. It actually, there is some benefit to it. So it's cool. Look, it's light. It's obviously it is aimed, I think, primarily at parents running it for their kids, but that's not a bad thing.
I think we need more. I remember when my kids were young, there weren't very many role-playing games targeting young children. So there was a couple, and they were good, like Fairy's Tale. I've talked about several others, but it's nice to see a high production value on a major, IP like that most kids really get into when they're younger. That you can jump in, and it's got enough meat that the parents actually interested in it, right? You can teach them some of the fundamentals of RPGs.
Well, that's right. And then, as I say, I think when you get and with board games as well, you'll get kind of these slightly lighter games, but it isn't always Snakes and Ladders and Ludo. What do you guys in the States call Ludo? You don't call it Ludo. What do you call it? You call it...
I got to Google it, and I don't even know what Ludo is. It must be a different name completely.
Yeah, you guys have got some crazy colonial name for it, but anyway.
Figuring it out now.
Yeah,
Parcheesi. Is it Parcheesi?
Yeah. Yes. Could be. It might well be.
That's what it's coming up as, yes. That's the one where two pieces can block. Yeah, it's Parcheesi. Yes.
Yeah. Typical, we call something a tap, you call it a faucet. Typical Americans coming up with a word much more complicated than it needs to be, but never mind.
Yeah.
So rather than having to play those games, there's so many. I mean, we're in such a great gaming era now. I think Kickstarter's got a big part of that. There's so many great games out there, and they are catering to all sorts. And one of the, I was at the UK Games Expo, and my wife and my son were there, and they picked up a load of great. I mean, there's one like Slappy Salmon, Happy Salmon, something like that, and that's kind of cool. Yeah. Rainbow Rage. They're really simple light games. They're quite kind of quirky and interesting. They've got, Rainbow Rage, you get cards which show the colours of the rainbow, but two of them are switched round. And it's the first, and you get these coloured rods, which are the different colours of the rainbow, and you have to grab them off the table if you spot which colours are the wrong way around to begin with. And it's a simple game, but it's fiendish. It's got a kind of an impulsive thing to it when you grab the wrong stick and all sorts of stuff. So I think my hobby, my gaming is I'm getting to play a lot of those kind of games as well, which I wouldn't normally go for, but I'm loving it. It's great. Go have kids. It's a good excuse to pick up all weird and wonderful games.
Exactly. I love it. See, I think it's great when gamer parents get their kids all into it. I think that's fantastic. Cool. What about you, Craig? What have you been playing lately?
I have been playing mainly 40K because it takes so long to play that you don't get mumuch time to play anything else.
Is that still a thing? Are you getting faster now?
No. I mean, I think Russ and I, my My least latest game was Imperial Guard or Astra Militarum versus Imperial Guard or Astra Militarum with Russ, right? And we played 1,500 points. And how long did that game take?
Well, we timed it, and we were like, we're going to try to get this done quick. And we did not include setup and teardown. So while we included was from the moment we rolled for deployment till the moment that we had a victor. And I want to say that was 3 hours and 45 minutes.
It was somewhere ungodly like that.
It was close to 4 hours. We were trying to get under 4 hours, and we just barely did it under 4. But we really wanted to get it under 3, so it was pretty long.
Right, and the interesting thing is that at no time during gameplay are you feeling that it's long.
No, it's fun.
And you're having fun, you're having a good time, you're all into the game, but then when it's done, it's kind of like you're emerging from a time warp. So so it's very odd. And you have no time to do anything else that day. So that was weird. And then over the weekend, our friend Joe had his big pig roast, which then results in the next day usually a nice casual, because the pig roast usually has over 150 guests. The next day
that's not a euphemism, is it? That's really a pig roast, yeah.
That's actually yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
No euphemisms. There's an actual pig.
Yeah, just because it doesn't translate very well. No, that's fine.
No. Yes, there's a pig and it gets roasted. And so we usually try to play games the next day. We ended up playing a game of 40K. We played Grey Knights versus Eldar, and this time that my Grey Knights, I hadn't even remembered I had my Grey Knights, to be honest. They were so far down in the packing queue that I had completely forgotten, and then I found a couple and I went, oh my god. So over the weekend I was digging them up and I found enough to make 1,000-point list, and so that was fun. Again though, that was 1,000 on 1,000, and it took about 3 hours to play. But again, didn't notice that it was taking a long time until after the game was over. In the same amount of time, the last time we all got together and played games over Joe's house, we played 2 games of the Marvel Miniatures game and 1 game of Blood and Plunder in the same amount of time. So it is starting to make you make some decisions on where you're spending your time. And then my last game of 40K, which was just a couple days ago, against Nerd Herders Ian, was my Grey Knights, which I had brought out, and of course I had fun, even though the Grey Knights did lose to the Eldar in the end, and they got wiped out. And you don't have very many of them when you're fielding them because they're so expensive. I wanted to try again, so he wanted to play a 2,000-point game. So 2,000 points of Necrons versus 2,000 points of Grey Knights. Mine's from the old Demon Hunters Codex is when I built the army. So it's Grey Knights and Imperial Guard or Astra Militarum put together. But 2,000 points is a lot of activate. I think I had 16 or 17 drops for deployment. And of course I went second because the bigger army currently. You're going second. That's going to shift now. We just found out. News flash, Warhammer 40,000. Games Workshop is already addressing things that are being taken advantage of at tournaments, and the new one is that if you finish deploying first, you get a +1 on the straight up die roll to see who goes first, so it's not automatic anymore.
And here's my first luck mitigation rule. Why do we even have that roll in the game? Let's be honest.
Which is
the steal
that roll?
Yeah, steal initiative. Why don't we just...
There is no steal initiative. Now it's actually you're going to roll off against each other.
Oh, okay.
And the reason that you would have that is because about 70% of the games were being won by the person who went first.
Uh-huh.
And you could engineer your army to go first more often than not.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I mean, in X-Wing, if you take less points than your opponent, and I've played with people that deliberately underpoint because they want the initiative.
Right.
Yeah, that's a thing. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. No, I get that part. I feel like they. Well, yes, but I'm sorry. I apologize for
stealing the initiative is no longer a thing because it's a straight up die roll, and you get a +1 if you deployed for finish.
That seems fair. It's less. It's a bonus for having a smaller army, but not a statistically
it's not a guarantee.
One. Yeah,
exactly. Which I think reminds me of like 3rd or 4th edition, but
yeah.
Anyway, so that was a lot of fun. In all three of these games, we used the objective cards, and I think that's my favorite mode of play, although I did like get the open war deck. So we might try one of those at some point to see how the open war deck, which gives you a mission, a quirky thing going on during the battle, and deployment zones, all in a deck of cards, which is what we've been asking for since like 2008. Right?
Yes, I believe it is.
Yeah. So and that was fun, but the objectives that I was drawing were just constantly much better than the objectives that Ian was drawing, including right off the bat, my initial hand of 3 gave me 5 victory points in turn 1. So that was a little rough, and I would not have been able to do that except that he got turn 1. He got to go first, but ceded that to me. Mm-hmm. He had a plan, I think, and so he let me go first. And because I was able to go first, it let me get, I think, 5 victory points right off the bat.
Nice.
Yeah, so that was, and then I kept like just drawing cards where either I was in a position to do what the card told me to do, or I was one turn away from being able to do it. But I was all over the board too with my teleportation. So I think for most of the game, I had 5 of the 6 objectives kind of sewn up. Mm-hmm. So it was good. It was a really fun game. It changes every time I play a new army. Maybe the games would go faster if I stopped switching armies, though. That's my only other
might
thought.
Be. So let me ask you this. So you've played against a variety of armies now, Space Marines, Chaos, Eldar, Necrons, Imperial Guard. Have you played enough to feel like the balance is pretty good and you're liking the game and the only real complaint is game length?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I've found anything... Like even the Necrons have some wacky weapons that kind of like do all kinds of weird, bizarre things within the rules. There's no like breaking the rules, but it gets frustrating. And then a minute later, you're like, oh wait, there's no armor penetration on that. Oh, okay, cool. So you get a lot of hits, but now I get a lot of saves. Now, if those guns were shooting at my Imperial Guard, I would probably feel worse.
Right.
But when they're getting 12 hits on my Space Marines that with full armor saves, then it doesn't hurt as much. So. I think like the stuff that should cost a lot, I think costs a lot. I'm sure there are holes in the system. I'm sure there's one unit out there that's amazing and super cheap, but none of us are looking for it, and none of us have found it, so it hasn't made it to the table. So I think so far so good on 8th edition. What about you, Russ?
Well, real quick, I played. So I mentioned last episode I put together my giant Kickstarter from Widower's Wood came in. So, Stuart, are you familiar?
Oh, cool.
Oh, yeah. So,
very cool.
So it's, Widower's Wood is the Horde's version of Undercity. And it really fixes one of the biggest problems in the game. So, Undercity, I love the mechanics of Undercity, but it's a really boring-looking game because it's basically a cobblestone board with cobblestone squares that block out a cobblestone street. And while it's effective and probably sort of realistic-looking, it doesn't look very exciting. So, with Widower's Wood, though, what they've done is now you're in a forest or swamp with tiles that look like copses of trees and little small ponds, and all of a sudden you've got a two-dimensional playing surface, but it's got much more interesting art on it, not unlike the Outdoors of Descent tiles. But then what I did was I set this up for my daughter, so I got the chest all out, we got all the bling, we picked our characters, and we're playing through the Widower's Wood campaign. There's actually, with the Kickstarter and all the expansions, I've got 3 campaigns now. There's the core Widower's Wood campaign. There's a bonus couple of missions that add to that, and then there's a 3rd campaign that came from a stretch goal, and then I still have the full campaign from Undercity, so I technically have 4 campaigns, and now there's like 8 heroes to choose from because of all the stretch goals and all kinds of fun stuff. So we got the heroes in there. We're starting to play. They loved it. We had a great time, and one of the things I did to kick it up a notch was anywhere on the table there was a little copse of trees tile, I put actual, miniature gaming trees on it and little ponds, and so it came to life. And then with the miniatures on it, it actually looked pretty cool. Love the mechanics of the game, the artificial intelligence in the cards, because it's a pure co-op. So it's all the players are each playing one hero of the Iron Kingdoms, whether it's from Hordes or from War Machine type stuff. And in the Widower's Wood stuff, you're mostly fighting the creatures of the woods, so mostly things you'd see in Hordes. Really cool. And what I also liked is really cool scenarios as well. So really enjoying that. We played 2 games, and they can't wait to play more. And I think we're going to play more this weekend because Mom's out traveling this weekend, so we're going to play some more games. So got that. We already talked about the 40K game that Craig and I played. I do really like the new edition, but it is a long playing game, so you got to block out a good part of the day. And then I just recently, I'll talk more about this later, I took my oldest daughter down to Disney as a super big 15th birthday surprise because she had always wanted
crazy.
to go. It was crazy.
Super surprise.
It was a super surprise. And more about that a little later. But one thing we did do is while we're waiting in line at the various rides, we started playing chess. So there's this really cool thing called Checkmate, and it's a messenger app for iOS. So it actually sits in your texting, and you can text the game board, and you take a move and it texts the board back. And that was a lot of fun. So played a couple games of chess. And then my daughter and I, one morning, were up early and we played some checkers down in the hotel lobby as well. So it was just kind of fun to break out the classics. And of course, checkers still has that problem where it can kind of go on forever. It does have sort of an end game hole, but otherwise it was a little bit of fun. So that was great. What about modeling, Stuart? Have you done any assembly or painting lately?
It's difficult because obviously I work in a gaming studio, so yes, I have. I've done lots of that.
Excellent.
Some of it I can talk about, some of it I can't talk about. But there's some. There is for Exodus for sure. There's some really really cool alien stuff and mechanical stuff, and there's some awesome stuff coming out. But I can't really go into why it's cool, but trust me, it's really cool.
So you get to build models before they're even out. That's kind of fun. That's a good gig.
Because I mean, part of the modeling process, because we have our own resin production facilities and stuff, and we've also got our 3D printer and all the other stuff, which is like a replicator from Star Trek. It's like some kind of sorcery. I mean, I've seen 3D printers and they're like piping out this rubbish, and it seems to take like 500 hours to do something, and it still looks like a ashtray or something. It's terrible. The thing that we've got is just it's magic. I mean, okay, it still takes a little bit of time, but it's amazing. But anyway, so there's that going on, which is kind of cool. So anything that the sculpting guys are coming up with digitally, they then got these various bits and pieces sitting on the desk. It's like, ooh, what's that? So that's kind of cool. But in terms of building other stuff, so I've got a Gene Stealer cult. I've had the Gene Stealer cult in various forms for ages. Like a hipster, I had Gene Stealer covens before they were cool. But and that's good. But see, unlike Craig, I've not really. So the new edition of 40k came out. I had a look at it. I sort of had a look at the rules. Had a bit of a play around with it. But it's just, for me, it's like lots and lots and lots. They've changed. They've refreshed so much of it. But fundamentally, the things that I wasn't super keen on in previous editions of 40k, which is that you're going to have quite a few things on the table in one, which means it takes quite a lot of time. But also, it's mainly 3s and 4s and 5s is kind of what you're rolling all the time, and you're just rolling a lot of dice. It's not. It's a shame because I love things like Necromunda and Mordheim and like the kind of the smaller scale stuff, and because I just think that background is so rich. But the thing is, I think 40k, because of the nature of what it is, it's not really floating my boat. But I love the miniatures, so I've got shelves and shelves. So my modelling wise, definitely building and undercoating and converting up sort of various gribblies and things, and that's all great. But I think mostly they're going to be doomed to remain in the cabinet, and the only time they're ever going to get touched is when I pick one up and think I really should probably paint this, and then don't, or if I'm blowing the layers of dust off it as it slowly but surely the various the skin cells of the various people that enter my office slowly but surely collects on top of my miniatures over the passage of time.
A pleasant way of wording that. Thank you.
Well, it's like a shrine to my own mortality, really. But there we go.
Right. All righty.
Nice. Craig, what about you? What have you been building?
What about me? Well, let me try to go back on track. Let's see. I've still been doing 40K.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I've been working on. I've nearly completed the Nurgle side of my second Dark Imperium box. So a whole bunch of Plague Marines and a bunch of Poxwalkers and those guys. I also picked up the Snap Together sets. So 3 more poses of the easy to put together Death Guard and 6 more Pox Walkers, and I did manage to pick up a Forge World Great Unclean one.
Ooh.
And that's an awesome model. That's just a really, really cool model. And a Forge World Plague Hulk, which is like a big giant, the Defiler, but all plaguified and big gross, googly grossness. And I customized a Hellbrute, which is that Chaos Dreadnought. So I almost all of that is almost finished now, which will then be time to move on to the next thing. And I've got to say, I'm just loving putting together the tables that we're using to play 40K on.
Mm-hmm, they look awesome.
All this terrain that I haven't used in a long time because it doesn't quite go with any other genre. But I've really enjoyed that.
Skulls
and getting
firm.
all that stuff out and painting up all those buildings and everything. And the Table War mats that we've been using have just been kicking it up another notch, which has been really cool. So check them out as well. So that's me. Russ, what about you? I'm intrigued. You've got a new project code word.
Yes. So I cannot, much like Stuart, although not nearly as cool, nor do I have a high-powered automated 3D printer. I am working on something I can only call Project Cherub. And so I'm spending all my modeling time working on this project. And Craig's been helping me a little bit with making sure it's coming together. But
I only just now realized
that's all I can say about Project Cherub at this time. But it will be eating to my modeling time for the foreseeable future. But hopefully I can reveal more in the not too distant future. So it's just a placeholder there, and it's mostly I'm just saying this so Craig doesn't tease me about not doing any modeling. That's really why I'm.
That's true. That's what that was there for. Okay. All right. Well, you know what? To make you feel better, Russ, why don't you go next with other and tell us what other geekiness you've been doing?
All right. Well, let's let our guest go first. We'll Stuart go, but I'll go before you.
Okay.
How does that sound? Fine. So Stuart, what have you been doing for other geeky goodness like movies, books, comic books, TV shows?
Yes, that's a guilty pleasure. So
there you go.
Rick and Morty. I'm loving Rick and Morty. New series has started for that. Fantastic show. Really, really, really good. Nice and subversive as well. And what I like about it is it's been subversive to the fans of Rick and Morty as well, because it'll set up something and you'll expect it to be like we had just had an episode called Pickle Rick. Where Rick, the lead character, turns himself into a pickle, and there'd been some bits and pieces floating around, and it was like kind of really cool. And you thought, it's all going to be about him slicing open rats and things in some kind of weird pickle suit thing. Well, he's a pickle, but he's wearing like the entrails and the brain stems and things of rats to manipulate, and cockroach body parts and things. And, if you've not watched Rick and Morty, by the way, it's dark, but so it's cool. But actually, there's like this whole B storyline, which is about a therapist and talking about how dysfunctional the family is. And it's, wow. Yeah. It's just, you sort of come for one thing, but you go away and there's some like real stuff to think about as well. So it's a fantastic show. And so I am liking Rick and Morty. I'm obviously watching Game of Thrones, but we've already had a chat about that. I'm also liking there's a few other things. So obviously non-gaming stuff aside, there's my son's obsessed with Lego Dimensions, and kind of getting my head around that, and it's genius. And obviously being British, I adore Doctor Who. As all true Brits should,
of course.
And the Lego Doctor Who stuff in Lego Dimensions is just unbelievably cool. And in the sense that you can use, it's been out for a while, but I'm only discovering it kind of in the last few months. So you can use the TARDIS, the Lego TARDIS, to travel back in time and forward as you would do in a TARDIS.
Of course,
but because it's this kind of like mashup of all these different genres and IPs and things. So, for example, you can be in the Simpsons level, so you can have the TARDIS. You can then use the TARDIS in the Simpsons level to travel back in time. Travel forward in time from the Simpsons, and you end up in the set of
Futurama.
No, the Jetsons.
Oh, I would have gone with Futurama because it's also
I would have thought Futurama, but no, it's the Jetsons, and it's just fantastic. It's the little subversive stuff, and as I say, and then I had the 12th Doctor running around with Newt from Fantastic Beasts running through the storyline of the Goonies and stuff like that. It's just, it's such a clever game, and I have a sneaky suspicion that it's now been cancelled. But it is such a great game though. It's a clever game the way it all mashes up. So that's, again, like I said with these board game stuff, your kids end up being a bit of an excuse to kind of indulge in stuff you wouldn't necessarily have given thought to. But you get in on it, and it's a bonding thing. I mean, Lego's great anyway, but it's a bonding thing. You can, being a fairly low maintenance parent, it means I get to spend time with my son and also play video games, and we both feel like we're getting valuable time out of each other. It's like when you go on a date and you take your date to the cinema, which means actually neither of you talk, and neither of you have to worry about any kind of social interaction for 3 hours or whatever it is because you're watching a movie together. So it's good stuff. That's what's floating my boat.
Excellent. Well, that's some great stuff there.
Oh.
So all right, Craig. Well, thank you for letting me go next. First of all, I'm still blasting through the Dresden Files books, and so I took a break from for a while, as I may have mentioned, but my youngest daughter is super into them now, and she got way ahead of me, and she's like, oh, you got to read the books. So I just finished book 12, Changes. Oh, man, there's some cool stuff happen at the end of Changes. I can't spoil it, but oh, my God. So now what's happened is I want to bounce on to 13, except what they've done is they've compiled during the course of the Dresden Files being written, and it was over many, many years, there were various side projects and anthologies that Jim Butcher, the author, was asked to be involved with. And at various times, he wrote a short Dresden story and put in these different anthologies. And what they've done now is they've gone back and collected all those and placed them into a single Dresden File anthology. There's actually a couple of these, but it's technically book 12.5, which includes a bunch of short stories, Dresden short stories. Some of them take place much earlier in the series, but the last one in the book is right after what happens in book 12. So I'm looking forward to that. But these side stories are really cool. Like one of them is about how Dresden first meets Murphy, things like that.
What's it called? What's the anthology called? Side Jobs. Yeah. And there are a bunch they're really cool. One of them takes place in a mall, and Harry's trying to celebrate his brother's birthday, and all kinds of crazy things happen. Just really, and it's funny because then there's a little bit before each story. Butcher does a little bit of an intro and explains like who invited him to write in the anthology, why, and what he was thinking, and so he kind of gives a little. It's actually really interesting to read or to listen to. In my case, I'm really enjoying that. I'm still listening. I'm still watching Twin Peaks, the new season. It's crazier than ever, but I have to say, the beginning I was a little nervous, but now they're getting back to all the quirky characters, and I'm really enjoying it. It is really fun to see all the crazy characters this many years later. And now they've also brought forward other quirky characters that you never really saw on screen but were always out there. Like for those who used to watch the old Twin Peaks, Diane, one of the quirks was the main character, the FBI agent, would always narrate to a tape recorder to this, which apparently is the secretary, Diane. Like, Diane, make a note. I'll need to request more, this next time I'm out here in the field or whatever. And he just talks to her all the time. And it's like this soliloquy he always does talking to this Diane. You never see in the original series. She's just out there. He records all these tapes. Well, in the new one, Diane's out. You meet Diane for the first time, and it's pretty awesome. Also, Preacher. I'm loving Preacher. Yes.
Stuart, have you seen Preacher, the series?
No, I haven't.
Oh, God. The series is so good. So it's about a preacher of all things, but it's got supernatural powers going on at the same time, but it's very irreverent. And he hangs out with
an alcoholic Irish vampire as a main character.
Alcoholic Irish vampire. He actually is one of the guys from, if you ever watched the BBC series Misfits.
Yep.
He's the sort of tall, lanky, crazy hair guy from Misfits. He was in the second season. And he's fantastic, and he really does a lot for the show. But that's a great sort of supernatural show with a very weird quirk because this preacher, I don't want to spoil anything. It's just really good.
Don't.
I won't spoil anything. Also, my kids and I blame the children, but I'm actually really enjoying this series. Netflix rebooted Voltron, the old giant animated robot made from Lions series that you may remember from the 80s. There was a terrible remake not many years ago, but Netflix has created a new one. It's now in season 3, and it's actually quite enjoyable. We really like it. We're putting it up there with not quite as good as Avatar: The Last Airbender, but it's in that zone of having an interesting, compelling story, but also bringing the wackiness in from time to time that makes it, and some reasonably good adult humor. So that's worth watching if you're an animated show fan. Still working my way through Mass Effect Andromeda. I am almost done, but I'm way over leveled because I keep going on side quests. Talked about Game of Thrones. And then real quick, I do want to mention, I did go out, and my daughter, who just turned 15 this past weekend, she has complained for years, and longtime listeners know that my wife and I are huge Disney nerds. We go pretty much once a year, but we never did go in August for what are pretty obvious reasons for anyone who knows the geography of the United States. Disney World is in Florida. Florida in summer is like 95-degree weather at 90% humidity. It is in no way a fun place to be. So we would never go that time of year. But my oldest daughter kept complaining. He's like, "You're never going to take me on my birthday." So we did. We just surprised her and took her for a weekend down there, just 3 days.
Cool.
She was totally surprised. But what was really surprising about it was I ran into a bunch of listeners down there. So Adam Pitzer and his lovely wife were there. They're huge Disney nerds.
Well, they're huge Disney nerds.
They were, and because it was kind of fun because they had just launched a brand new, for Disney nerds out there, new fireworks at the Magic Kingdom. So we're huge Disney nerds there. You don't want to get that many Disney nerds in a space seeing something new at Disney World. It's not a pretty picture. We had a great time. Thank you to them for saying hello to us and spending a nice evening watching fireworks. That was great. And then who of all people was in Disney World, Craig? Owen Staten.
Wow, what are the chances?
Owen's entire family. Owen's tweeting that he's going to Florida. So Stuart, I don't know if you know this, but Owen's been a long-time listener. He's been on the show several times. He is a storyteller and police officer from Wales. And he shows up in the U.S. He's also a pretty big Disney fan. He comes, not frequently because it's a long flight, but from time to time. And I happened to notice he was here and met up with his lovely family, so I wanted to say hi to them and thank you so much. We had a nice afternoon lunch on Sunday. It was very nice to see them again. And when we had visited Wales last summer, they had shown us so much nice hospitality. It was so great to see them again. Kids get along wonderfully. So glad to see them, and they're all doing well. And finally, I did want to share, because everybody here is a sci-fi nerd, so the big new thing at Disney, for anybody who's watched the news at all, is Disney just opened up a whole new area in the Animal Kingdom based on the movie Avatar, and it's called Pandora. So now, anyone who's listened to the show knows I'm not a fan of Avatar, the movie. I didn't think it was really that compelling. I mean, unobtainium kind of says it all. However, the world is pretty interesting, and Disney's done an amazing job. There's two things about this that are worth seeing. First of all, the world is amazingly done. And one of the things that's neat about the theming is it does feel like you've walked onto another planet. They've got this fake plants and floating in Pandora, the rocks kind of float. And they've done this really interesting job of making the rocks feel like there's mountains floating over your head. But also what's really interesting is in the evening, everything is photoluminescent, just like in the movie. And they've got this really neat trick with black lights everywhere outdoors. So even the paths are glowing, and it's like there's bioluminescence everywhere. Really, really impressive. And the theming is so strong that even when you go to pay for something with your credit card at the credit card machine, it's the only place in Walt Disney World where it's not Mickey Mouse on the machine. It's actually ACE, which is the company that sponsors the flight to get you to Pandora. So like everything is super. You're supposed to really be on Pandora and no longer
immersive.
on Earth. Really immersive. But the best part is this one ride where you actually transfer your sentience into an avatar, a Navi, just like it happens in the movie, and you get to ride a Banshee. And the way they pull this off, it is the closest thing you'll ever feel to actually riding something like a dragon. Because the way they pull this off is, for those who've been to Disney and know the ride Soarin' or Star Tours, so imagine the ride where there's a bunch of chairs, and you're in a giant theater, but you don't really notice it. And you sit down in this simulator chair where they're going to transfer your consciousness. But what actually happens is you feel like you're sitting in a motorcycle seat leaning forward, and you've got a very light pair of 3D goggles on, and then up go the screens, and there's this moment of like your brain getting transferred, and then you're on the back of a Banshee. And it's flying around. It's really, really cool. There's full movement. The chair moves independently of everybody else, so you have independent movement. And there's even panels against your legs on the inside, and those panels move like the dragons breathe, like the Banshee's breathing. So it's like riding a real horse. And like at one point you land after a hard flight, and you can feel them breathe. It's extremely immersive. And even as a non-Avatar fan, I was like, wow, that's one of the coolest experiences. So
that sounds
if
awesome.
you happen to be anywhere near Orlando and you haven't done this crazy thing yet, or you're planning a trip to Disney, get the Fast Passes super early. It's really hard to get into. It's a super long wait, but definitely worth the experience. Pandora over there. So if you want to feel what it's like to ride a dragon, I think Disney's got it locked up for the moment.
Fantastic.
So, Craig, what about yourself, sir? What have you been doing for geeky?
Well, I'll keep it quick. I've been talking about the things I've already talked about the things I've been watching. So, Killjoys, loving where that story is going. Great story, great characters, great writing. Dark Matter is catching up on the deficiencies it had in its first couple seasons, but more slowly. But I still enjoy the idea and the concept behind it. Preacher, as Russ said, is great. Game of Thrones, as we've talked about already, is great. Movies, sadly, not so great. Valerian, I saw. That was very disappointing.
Not good.
Oh, is it no good? I was looking forward to that.
Such a bad casting job.
Oh, yes. Not a good experience.
Secondly, the story is very thin, which I would be more inclined to forgive if the casting had been. The main character is just not any of the things his character is clearly supposed to be, and
I love the comic. So this,
that's I sat down and had a chat with one of our friends who really loves the comics, and he disliked it more than I did because he had more in his mind going into it. Yeah. So that was bad. I would say same problem with Dark Tower. The more you know, probably the less you're gonna like it. I love Idris Elba. He's one of my favorite actors, and he does a great job as Roland of Gilead. But it suffers from a lot of the same problems I think the movie version of Ender's Game suffered, where they wanted to cram so many things in from the books that it's all in there without any context at all.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of just like, oh, there's this. And if you read the book, you remember it, but it's not in there with any context. And if you didn't read the book, you have no idea why that's even in there because it has no impact on the story. So it's just like, wow, okay.
That's a shame.
Then one of the most dramatic battle scenes is in complete and total darkness. So it's almost like Transformers level waste of conflict in the storyline where you just can't see anything that's going on. So it was I wasn't upset at either of those. I enjoyed Valerian on a certain level. I mean, it was wacky and weird, and it was visually really cool. And I enjoyed Dark Tower on a very similar level. But neither of them were at anywhere near as good as I was hoping they were going to be.
So holding out for Blade Runner then, yeah?
Yes, exactly.
Sure.
Yes, that would be my, and then I saw Dunkirk, which is not really geeky, but there's lots of World War II games, so I'm just going to go with it. And I think this obviously the story is very dramatic, is extremely well told. The problem I had with the movie is that it tells sort of three different stories all at the same time, and all three of them are working on a different timeline. So you're talking about the infantry on the mole, and their story lasts 5 days. And then the civilian flotilla trying to get them off the mole, and their story lasts 5 hours. And then the RAF pilots who are trying to cover both the flotilla and the men on the mole, and their story lasts about 5 minutes. And it tells you at the very beginning, 5 days, 5 hours, 5 minutes. So you kind of know when you shift point of view where you are in the story. But it's like if you're seeing the airplane stuff, you're seeing stuff that happened 4 days after the stuff that you're seeing on the beach, and it got not really so much confusing as you just had to constantly make a mental adjustment every time you saw somebody, because you'd be like, wait a minute, I thought we just saw that plane crash. Oh, that plane crashed earlier now the boats have caught up, and okay. So it was I don't know if you could have told the story they wanted to tell any other way, but the way they told it was a little disjarring and disjointed. But the acting was great. The story obviously is fantastic. So that was that. And then books, still listening to Wolves of the Kala, getting more and more into it, which is pretty much my pattern with Dark Tower books. I have to readjust every new book, and then it takes me about half the book to get into, and then I'm all into it. So there I am. And getting a lot of awesome feedback on Legacy of Shadow. So thanks to you guys who have tried it out. And thanks to the people who have been giving me a lot of positive reinforcement. I appreciate that. And Ray did a great job, and there have been a lot of really nice things said about him as well. So just thank you for that. And that is my achievements.
There you go. So that's finally achievements, I think, right?
That is finally achievements, yes.
Excellent.
The D6 generation. Not as smart as Yoda, but not as dumb as Jar Jar Binks. Wise, the announcer is. Harold.
Hey, and now it's time to talk about our friends at BattleFoam.com. Exactly. If you need the foam, BattleFoam is the place to go. And, of course, longtime listeners will know that BattleFoam has been a sponsor of the show since the very itty-bitty beginnings of their company and pretty much the D6 generation. And it's been a fantastic ride. We've been able to watch them go from foam to cases to every kind of case in between. And Craig, I am so excited about this brand new product. I can barely contain myself. It is in fact,
what product is that, Russ?
This would be the Privateer Press backpack. Have you seen this thing?
I was just looking at that. That looks like it's mighty versatile, is what it looks like.
It is made for me. In fact, I think it's made for any gamer. You don't have to be a fan of Privateer Press, but this might be the coolest backpack they've ever put together, Craig. It has it's got the slick look you might want. Multiple pods, if you will. Pods of awesome, as I would call them. And, of course, you can load that baby out any way you like, as it is with all of their stuff. You can buy the cases chock full of a standard loadout of foam, or you can pick and choose which pieces of foam best fill your needs.
Or you can buy it empty if you've already got a bunch of trays of foam and you're just looking for a new way to get them from point A to point B.
Exactly right. So, and that's what, what attracted me to this, of course, is being a big Privateer Press fanboy. Anything with their logo on it gets me excited. And, of course, that's what makes BattleFoam so cool. They have an amazing selection of authorized, official branded bags for just about every game you're interested in. So, take a look there. Check it all out. Malifaux, Guild Ball, Privateer Press. You name it. They got trays for every miniature under the sun. And, of course, if you don't have it, check out their brand new Tray Creator, Craig. The new 2017 Custom Tray Creator.
It's a great thing. I love the Tray Creator. I could do it for hours.
And it's even easier now to crank out exactly, let's say you want to have a tray for some X-Wing models, some tokens, and, a Space Marine. You can do all of that in one tray. That's the best part. And make them fit perfectly for exactly what you need. So don't wait. Don't delay. Head on over to BattleFoam now and find out exactly what you need over at BattleFoam.com. Hooah!
And now, in an attempt to bring a small amount of dignity and decorum to this otherwise base form of entertainment, and I use the term loosely, I am proud to present...
Oh, get on with it. It's time for App of the Ep.
Seriously, Wakeland, I used to have my own segment, and now I'm relegating to announcing this pap.
Hey, you're lucky we still use you. Hey, and welcome to another App of the Ep. This time around, I want to talk about a app that I found as a DM and kind of as a podcaster. This is sort of a handy one. And it's called Syrinscape, Syrinscape. So Siren or Siren, I guess, Scape. And this is really a app all about making great sounds and background noises. And it's primarily designed for an RPG fan. So there's a couple of flavors of the app, but my favorite one is the Syrinscape one because it allows you to, has all these different background musics really designed for a fantasy RPG setting. You can go ahead and create an account online and sign in, but you don't have to do that. When you load it right up, there's a few free moods that are ready to go right out of the box. And so these let you do things like you can tap a button and immediately make the sound of a fireball or a lightning bolt or swords clashing or a crowd going ooh or ah. And then also there's these great tunes in the background you can click that's sort of like just set mood music. So if you've got your iPhone or Android device paired to some nice Bluetooth speakers in the room, you can easily change the moods with just a button click and then click all these little sound effects that might kick in a moment's notice. So it would be awesome if you're doing a podcast and you want to have quick sound effects in the background, but also fantastic. And really what it's designed for is RPG fans. There's even little noises for like spell curses and growls and beast attacks. And what's really cool is you can then save these different collections of buttons and mood music and name them after specific kinds of events. So it comes with a few samples like Bugbear Battle or Witchwood, and these are sort of generic things that are really designed to fight growly creatures and stuff. But you could have custom settings for any encounters you're going to have. You can create your own sounds, add your own things to this, and really make it a very dynamic and be ready to go for your favorite battle. What's nice is a lot of them come, a small batch of them come free, but then they have a lot more of these really cool pre-made sort of I don't know, I call them sort of like soundtracks or feelings or moments, and some of them they charge for, right? But you're going to be tempted to really start buying them because there's really cool ones here, and there's a lot of really cool stuff. There's also another version of the app, so if you look for Syrinscape, you'll see several. The other one is for board games. So there's one that's designed for board gamers with cool sound effects like oohing and eyeing. There's actually a Catan sort of feeling one that adds the right things there as well. So these guys are really embracing the madness. It really sets the mood for the DM too, with nice background pictures and images and colors that really are evocative of what the event is. So I just really love this. I mean, as an RPG fan, I love anything I can do to set the mood for our players. I remember we had a guest on not too long ago, and she was talking about how when they play RPGs, they each buy their own mug that matches their character. So things like sound and audio just do that much more to deepen the experience and just make it that much more fun. So definitely check it out. It's Syrinscape on iOS, and I'm pretty sure it's on Android too.
Thank you for listening to another scintillating edition of App of the App, a segment in which,
hey, less of that, more just getting on with the show.
Seriously, Wakeland, you are like school in summer. No class.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. Sure. And, of course, we've got Stuart here in the third chair, and it is his first time in the third chair, so we do have a little bit of a tradition, Stuart. We have a question that we ask every person the first time they appear in the third chair, and that question would be a sort of a segue into your origin story. Are you now or have you ever been a gamer?
Yes.
Excellent. There you go.
There you go. I'm giving nothing away.
Would you care to elaborate? Where did you start? Was it chess, checkers, Chinese, checkers? What happened there? I don't know. Anyway, so how did it all begin?
A proper game for me, or proper gaming start for me, would be back in the 80s. I played a game. Probably a load of people are familiar with it, Hero Quest.
Oh, yes.
I don't know who made it over in the States, but in the UK it was done by a company called MB Games.
Yep, Milton Bradley, same guys. Milton Bradley in the US. Yep.
And so did Hero Quest. That was something that we did. My dad, my brother, and me. And it went from there. There was a new one coming out called Space Crusade, which is kind of like a futuristic version. I thought, that sounds interesting. So I got that and played that. And then there was a little note saying, oh yeah, this is part of something called Warhammer 40,000. And I thought, what? That sounds weird. And so I picked up a White Dwarf, and we fast forward many years later, and so it's that was the beginning of the very slippery slope. It's probably a familiar story for a lot of people, kind of in their late 30s, early 40s, as a journey.
Now, Stuart, were you a miniature gamer from the beginning? Was that sort of your first exposure to board games or gaming in general? So were you painting right from the very beginning?
So when before Hero Quest came out, before I saw it, I had no idea that there was really a game could be any deeper than like something like Snakes and Ladders or something like that. Scrabble, Monopoly, maybe. But once that was out, the idea of so you got your playing pieces, so it had a little bit to do with like your scale models when you're painting them, and it was that tapping into that creative thing that I think is in a lot of people, and it was just a way to express, because you didn't have to paint them in the way that they showed them on the box. And in fact, if you're like me and you're club-handed, you couldn't paint them like they painted them on the box. So it was so open it up to that kind of creativity, and then I suppose you've even got because again, same kind of generation of like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff, where you had the idea of, well, okay, so I've got my barbarian. What's a barbarian's name? What's the story there? And so there's, I suppose, role playing aspects come in, and it just, that really did open up all sorts of possibilities. And what was great was it was the mid 80s was a brilliant time in terms of all these things that had been around for many years, like Dungeons and Dragons and so forth, but they weren't overly commercial at that point. They weren't really kind of, the people that were making them, it was more kind of like made for love type of thing, which I suppose in some ways is a bit of a parallel to now, because I think we're going through another golden age of gaming now, but we'll talk about that another point. But yes, certainly at that point, then it was kind of, that opened the door, and then you kind of looked around, and there was just so much. There were so many different weird and wonderful things, different sort of cliques and things that had their own. Oh no, this is what gaming is about. And I was lucky. There was a gaming club in my local town called the Hermit, which was kind of strange, but never mind. And going down there, and people like playing Cyberpunk, and people playing Tunnels and Trolls, and all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff. And it was, absolutely, that was the moment that a big light turned on, and excellent. I haven't really looked back since.
Nice. So, and did you ever dip your toes into other like RPGs and sort of hobby board games, or did you pretty much stay miniature gaming the entire
Oh time? No, I've done all sorts of stuff. Right. I have. I mean, at the moment, where I'm sitting at the moment. I'm about 10 feet away from my man shed, which is full of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of board games and card games and miniature games and all sorts of stuff, many of which I had the privilege of owning but probably never playing. I pretty much any kind of gaming I've done. Some has kind of struck a chord more. I mean, I've done live role play, and that didn't really kind of work for me, mainly because what I love about role play is kind of the escapism that you can be something completely different to what you actually are. A bit like radio plays, where you can play somebody that you don't look like physically. Right. But with live role play, I'm then limited by the kind of the meat sack that I am, and that kind of makes things a little strange credulity ever so slightly. Right. No elven warriors for me. So but no, I really enjoy role play, particularly so GMing and running people through my theatre of cruelty. I enjoy.
I love it.
So I guess narrative gaming is probably the thing that I enjoy the most, kind of building and telling a story collectively with a group of sort of like-minded people, and I like narrative campaigns and that kind of stuff. So wargaming for me is a means to kind of tell stories. That's the bit about wargaming I enjoy. So although I have played in tournaments and things, gaming for the sake of sort of smashing somebody's face in isn't hugely on my. It doesn't really tick a box for me. Mm-hmm. I get the appeal. Everybody likes to win from time to time. Sure, but it's not that's not the big draw for me. But again, I suppose like most people, you kind of, when you're exploring it for the first time, you give most things a go. If somebody's telling you this is great, no, this is what it's all about, and you give it a go. So I've done sort of historical gaming, and again, there's aspects of that I totally get, but when somebody's getting upset because you've not got the right colour camouflage or something, that's again, I think that's just taking it a little bit too far for me. All sorts of gaming I've tried.
Looks like you've done quite the gambit. That's awesome, and it sounds like you're pretty similar to Craig and I in that we've dabbled everywhere, but we keep coming back to sort of the non-realistic miniature gaming realms, right? Like the not historicals and sort of. Do you gravitate towards sci-fi or fantasy, or do you are they all good? I mean, do you have a particular genre that you favor?
I see. You're getting. I mean. Those in the Warcradle studio are going to be rolling their eyes. I really like fantasy, but my definition of what a fantasy is, fantasy gaming is maybe it's a slightly broader church. So, for example, Warhammer 40,000 is a fantasy game. Star Wars is fantasy. In fact, most things are fantasy, because for me, when I think science fiction, I'm talking like quite hardcore, quite.
You're hard, hard sci-fi. So you're like an Asimov.
Yeah,
like
real
sci-fi.
high, Peter Hamilton. That like real hard,
cool.
Asimov.
Yeah, right.
Arthur C. Clarke, that kind of stuff. Like real, quite tight.
Got it.
High concept stuff. So anything else, where almost anything where you kind of come up with pseudoscience to explain it, it might as well be magic. Sure. Yeah, so the hyperdrive in Star Wars is magic. It's magic that makes the ships go. You can come up with all sorts. Oh no, it's this, and this. Right. Lightsabers, they work on magic. It's and so that's why they're. So when I talk about I enjoy fantasy, because really it's just about telling great stories. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I mean, I love Star Trek, so I like the idea that it's matter and antimatter that powers the warp drive, etc. But really, it just gets the Enterprise from point to point.
Right, from plot 1 to plot 2, right?
Yeah. I mean, you don't want to get too... it's that's the other thing that kind of makes me smile is... and again, I found this a little bit sometimes with historical gamers where... but also with people that are really passionate about... So people that love Star Trek, and I would consider myself one of them, but again, one of the things they're really proud of is the science of Star Trek, and that's great. There's some phenomenal science that kind of is used as a springboard to kind of jump the imagination. But I think where it, don't get so high up on the science that it gets in the way of telling a good story. And I mean, you look at, so by all means know how fast the Enterprise can be, and it's fast, and it's warp 9 and all this kind of stuff. But if you really think about it, the Federation is like 10,000 light years across. So it takes years, even with like the super fast warp drives, it would still take years to actually travel across it. But in Deep Space Nine, the Defiant could get to Earth from the station in like an advert break. It's like, well, no, seriously, that journey is we've got to get to Earth. That's taken them like 8 months to do. But let's gloss over that thing for the sake of the story. But then let's get really, really into the science in some other aspect. So it's fine. I think like my gaming, just don't take it too seriously and don't let things get in the way of telling a good story. I think so. Fantasy wins for me. Great.
I like it.
Yeah, that
I can get behind that.
I can get behind that too. I'm with you on that stuff. So how did you go from gamer? At what point, Stuart, did you go from kind of like, all right, this is awesome. I'm loving this hobby. I love all these games. I'm a crazy collector. To I think I'd quite like to get into the industry. How did that sort of start happening?
Okay, I think that everybody that's into gaming, because it's in my opinion, it's about pretending. It's about make believe. It's making stuff up, and it is. Whether it's you getting really passionate about your army and you create all the characters and everybody has a personality or whatever, or you get really into the background of something. And I think some of the really successful games out there have got very, very rich backgrounds, which really do make such a difference, because essentially you're just buying chunks of plastic or lead or resin or whatever. They don't have any value except for the kind of what they represent in your mind. So I think because of that, one of the first things we tend to do when we start playing a game is we don't try and change the game necessarily, but we kind of we like pushing things a bit and kind of exploring and saying, well, my army or my guys, he's not quite like, or she's not quite like whatever the standard captain is, or standard forces, because my one's different. My hero's that little bit more special, and you start to play around and expand on it. So I think my journey is probably similar to a lot of people's, where I just started playing around with stuff. And I remember so we had I started playing Warhammer 40,000, but because we found a good friend of mine at the time, a guy called Andrew Pettit, because we both found the rules. It was a massive Rogue Trader. It was this like thick like phone book, right. and really now looking back on it, it wasn't brilliant actually, but in terms of a cohesive vision, it wasn't superb. But it certainly as a young lad, it was pretty impenetrable. So we came up with our own version, which was all the bits we liked about Warhammer 40,000, but kind of with our own spin on it, where our own particular games and our own particular stories were the most important, the most central thing, and we gave it it became its own. It was our version of Warhammer 40,000, and I think, you get into role play then, and I like playing other people's games, but I really enjoy the world building and kind of creating the setting for all the players to then ruin it and do things that you don't expect. That's part of the fun.
That's their job. Right.
Railroading is the worst thing you can do. So you just build this huge, cool sandbox and then watch them go crazy in it, and put things together in ways that you didn't expect, and so on. So I think from a very sort of young age, that was definitely something I enjoyed to do. And as I got older, I suppose your time gets more precious. As you get older, you become sort of more cash rich, but time poor. And I mean, it's relative. It's still not got a pot to pee in, but but comparable, I certainly have a lot less free time than I used to. And so then you sort of start to think, well, actually, if I really enjoy the creating side of it, and it's okay to play in somebody else's stuff, but I prefer creating, and I don't have a lot of time. Do I really want to spend time then doing something that's okay, when if I've only got a limited amount of time, why don't I just do the things that really brings me pleasure? It's maybe a selfish thing to do, but it's my hobby. I do what I like. So
that's fair.
Yeah.
I think that's fair.
Right.
Yeah.
It's my hobby. I'll do what I like. Darn it. Yeah, I like that idea.
So that's really where that started. So I started to just run and organise and build things. When I was at university, I got a part-time job working for some dodgy 2-bit company. You might have heard of it, Games Workshop, I think it was called.
Oh, those guys.
And so I worked with them for at university, and then after university, and so about 12 years passed, and I was a store manager. But I also did. By this point, again, because it's the creating side of it that I enjoyed, I used to organise sort of campaign narrative gaming weekends and things at Warhammer World in Nottingham, and that went really well. I was lucky. I think at the right time, I sort of launched a few bits and pieces that I think some people kindly still remember that were sort of around at that point. So I did some Horus Heresy stuff. This is before Forge World did their fantastic Horus Heresy stuff. But I did a Horus Heresy thing. We covered some of the more obscure parts of the background, like the Age of Apostasy, for anybody that knows much about that. So that was really where it. So I was doing these campaign weekends. So I was really enjoying that, and I was running the stores, and I was enjoying that. But I enjoyed the creating side of it more. But then it all came to a point where I had children and responsibilities and a mortgage, and it's one of those things you blink and you realise you're in your 30s, and you're sort of thinking, oh, okay, maybe I can't just be doing the things that I'm enjoying and want to do, and maybe I do need to start to earn a bit of money or whatever. So I left gaming entirely, left the industry entirely, and went to the ambulance service for a few years. A little bit of a career change.
A little bit.
But so I did that for a few years, and that was I thoroughly enjoyed that. It was very rewarding. I really did feel like I was making like a grown-up difference rather than a difference to sort of peers and things. It was actually, it was good stuff. But then I bumped into a guy that I'd known from when I was doing the campaign weekend stuff, and he was leaving a gaming company in Essex. He was on the way out from them, and a guy called Gary, lovely guy, and he said, "Look, I want to introduce you to somebody. I think you two should meet and have a chat." So I met the MD of Wayland, and I joined them to kind of do some stuff with them. And it's the old, you can't see, but I'm doing the Godfather Part 3 thing where I'm kind of drawing my hands back in, and just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. Yeah.
Now,
so
when was that? How long have you been with Wayland now, Stuart?
5 5 and a bit years.
Nice.
5 and something, 5 and change.
That's great.
Nice.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
awesome.
So it's and again, I joined it. Again, it's weird, isn't it? Where I think you can't deny what drives you, and so my role at Wayland is still so. I'm general manager with Wayland, so I run the office. I organise. I do kind of more of the business side of things. But if I'm honest, I would not be doing that type of job if we were selling mops or we were doing something. It's because it's a gaming company that was a bit that was the really interesting part to it. I believed in what was being done, and I enjoyed being around like-minded people because there were really, really nice bunch of people there. And then there was the opportunity with Warcradle. Warcradle was something we talked about for a while as we really should be doing this, because we could see where the industry was going, and it seemed to make sense. We thought we could do something different, not in an arrogant way necessarily, but just look, there are some things because of the way we are as a company. We can see almost we get to cherry pick because we get to see all the mistakes that people have made and all the brilliant ideas that people have come up with. And is there a way that we can kind of replicate some of the great stuff people are doing and maybe try and avoid some of the naff stuff people have done and maybe throw in some innovations of our own. So we kind of bummed around with the idea of doing Warcradle for a couple of years, actually. And then there was an opportunity to get more serious about it. And, here we are.
You are. Exactly. For those not familiar, Stuart, and I know Craig's got a lot of questions too, but just give people an overview, what is Wayland Games and what was the Warcradle sort of concept?
Okay, so Wayland Games, we are a large European online retailer. I mean, we're a global retailer, but obviously we're based in the UK. So I can appreciate that some parts of the world our profile may not be as large as it would be elsewhere. But we're primarily an online retailer. We have a couple of bricks and mortar retail stores as well. Wayland has been running for best part of a decade now, and sells everything from anything tabletop hobby related. We even had Stormtrooper helmets in inventory at one point. So nice. Pretty much anything loosely tabletop hobby related. Wayland stocks or orders in for people. So that's what Wayland is, and Wayland is the bit that's the successful bit and kind of makes a lot of sense from a business point of view. And anybody that was kind of looking at the books and go, oh yes, I can see why you're doing this. Warcradle, on the other hand, is basically if you've got a giant sort of Scrooge McDuck swimming pool full of gold coins, probably gaming. Let's do a gaming company. Let's just go and blow all of that money on a gaming company because that'd be a great idea. So yes, so that's plus apparently you can't dive into a swimming pool full of coins. Somebody was telling me it would kill you.
Does it work? You've tried the
no, apparently it kills you because essentially it's a giant pit full of metal. So you just you just die if you springboard into it. It
does look painful. Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Apparently, if you're an animated duck, it works. But if you're if you're a human being, apparently you die. But
stupid innovation.
That doesn't seem fair.
See, this is how you know. This is how you know DuckTales is not hard sci-fi. See, these are the.
This is it. This is
that
it.
would be fantasy.
Right.
It's a plot point. From the plot, the plot needs to express that Scrooge McDuck has a lot of money.
Right.
Therefore, he swims in a pool full of gold coins.
Physics be damned, right? It doesn't need it. Right.
What more do you need? Yeah, absolutely. So we then we did Warcradle. So Warcradle Studios is it's a creative group within Wayland Games, so it's not a separate company. It's part of Wayland, but it is internally sort of very clearly segmented away from Wayland. So there are, I don't necessarily need to bore you to tears with it, but there are sort of several sort of we will not kind of thing that we've agreed, so that because there's no point having a gaming studio and then only using Wayland as a retailer to support it, because that's crazy. That's just like some kind of vanity project gaming studio. It's got to be something that's trying to create games for everybody, and the only way that everybody can get access to play the games is if they see them in their local stores and they see other people playing them and so on. So things like Kickstarter for the main game, I'm not saying little like box games and things, but I'm talking about the main range for the game that you want retailers to stock. Going straight to Kickstarter for us was not part of our plan. And similarly, just massively discounting it through Wayland, or in fact discounting it at all through Wayland, was also not a plan, because why would we effectively undercut people, all the other retailers that we want to do partnerships with them. We want them, in fact, and the MD might get cold sweats over this, but I'd even sort of be okay with, if I knew that the other retailers out there were stocking it, I'd be fine with Wayland not selling it at all, because for the game to be successful and for all the people in Australia and America and South America and China and Europe and all over the world, Africa, I thought I'd missed a continent. It can't just be Wayland hauling itself around the world. It has to be something that retailers, other partners want to get on board, and that with Warcradle, that's one of the things that we had seen. Not all of them, some of them are brilliant, but we had seen other manufacturers who essentially get to a point where they start competing with their own retailers, and it's like, why would you do that? Why try and do massive discount deals? I know why, because they need short-term cash, and I totally get that. But that was one of the things we were very keen not to do, if we could help it, because I think it hurts a game long-term if for the short term, you end up cutting the throat of the people that you want to be carrying your game. Why is the gaming store down the road going to be carrying the game with all their overheads and things, and encouraging their regulars to be playing it, if Wayland's sitting there knocking 20-30% off the shelf price? That doesn't make sense.
I think that's really well thought out, right? Because you need, people don't get into miniature games unless they feel confident that there is a community, right, and local excitement, and so not having it in the local store really is sort of a ding, kind of a big ding against the game. Seeing it there on the shelf, seeing folks playing it in the store, that's really what gets miniature gamers excited, right? So knowing there's people they can find to play it. So I think I think you guys are right on. Now, is Warcradle sort of a labor of love situation, or is it kind of like we think there's going to be products out there that can really be successful financially as well as inspirationally, and so you're doing both those? You know what I'm saying?
But I mean, it feels like the labours of Hercules at the moment, to be honest. Look, we are certainly. Richard, the MD, and myself, it's business as well. I mean, so yes, absolutely. For me, creatively, there's some fantastic opportunities, but we would not be making something that we did not think. Look, if we wanted to just make a game for the sake of making a game, and it was just about, I say, like almost, let's say, labour of love, vanity project or whatever, we could self-publish. We just make the game, and maybe people buy it, maybe they don't. It doesn't really make any difference. We've got a couple of gaming stores. We've got a gaming hall, so we'll just make sure that that's front and centre in there, so it kind of gives this false sense that the game has some kind of floor existence. And it'll get a little local community, so we'll get some kind of comfort that we know it's being played, and that's the end of it. That's fine. Why else do we need to do a game? But that isn't what it's about. So obviously, Wild West Exodus, rather than talking in the abstract about games, so Wild West Exodus is our current labour of love, but we wouldn't be doing Wild West Exodus if we just thought, what the world needs is, it just needs another Wild West game, kind of another weird sort of steampunk Wild West game, because they're not like 10 a penny. Instead, we look to the background and the fantastic stuff that Romeo and Craig and others had done on it, and there was something there. It wasn't necessarily fully formed. It wasn't in its final form, but there was a spark of something really interesting there. So that's where, yes, labour of love, because we felt it was something that we could enjoy exploring together with the community, but also from a business point of view, there's definitely, the miniatures are fantastic. The setting, there is something there. There's been a few painful changes that have been made, which some of the first edition, the old guard, as it were, of the game, have struggled with, but they have mainly been made from a business point rather than necessarily just a creative point of view in a vacuum, because the Wild West Exodus now, certainly for second edition, or it just is Wild West Exodus now, it's got a very distinct intellectual identity, which it didn't. There were some aspects of it that were really clear, and then there was a lot of stuff which was to anybody. I mean, I was looking the other day, there was a game out which is some kind of vague kind of steampunk. Well, it's not even steampunk, it's like kind of a supernatural. I mean, when I was a younger guy, we had Deadlands and all sorts of supernatural, weird West, as it were. It's not new. That's been around for a long time. So that in itself isn't something that I think has got legs. It'll make to be honest, I think like a straight cowboy game, a straight Western game. It's kind of got a niche interest. It will appeal to a particular group of people, but I don't think it's going to have mass appeal. You look at the games where I think they've been clever and they've kind of broadened the world and they've made it a richer world. So Warhammer 40,000, it's not just a fantasy, future fantasy game. There's so much background and really all of the factions have really rich background to them. And even the kind of the ones which are almost a little bit of a cipher, like you look something like the Necrons or something like that for Warhammer 40,000, there's still more written about them than there are about most other factions for most other games. Right. It's the richness of it. So that was something we knew we wanted to do. And again, that was a labour of love, but that was something that we knew. So working with people like Craig and also a whole bunch of other talented people. Unfortunately, Craig, there are other people who are talented out there. Yeah, and so we but a whole bunch of really talented people and all pouring great ideas. And I'm really proud of the way Wild West Exodus is now shaping up, and I do think it is something special, and not just because we made it, but I think it genuinely. I think what it represents is different. Part of the challenge now is to make sure that people can see its differences, because there's a lot. I did mention earlier, it's a golden era of gaming we're in, but I think because of that, there's a lot of choice out there. It's not like it was back in the 80s where you had maybe 24 games that you were likely to encounter. Now it's more like there's 120 different games.
Well, Stuart, if a giant cyber werebear carrying a twin-link Gatling cannon can't differentiate your game, I don't know what can, quite frankly.
Well, you say that.
Right. I know. That's the thing.
Yeah.
No, it's great.
Yeah.
So it's clear that you wanted to. So let's get into Wild West Exodus a bit, because I'm really excited, and I know Craig's really excited, but I'm really excited as well to see you guys sort of become the new stewards of Wild West Exodus, and really excited to watch where you're taking. And of course, Craig knows more than he can talk about, but I can sit here as the unwashed masses, as it were, the uninformed gamer, and ask these kinds of questions. So clearly you want to take, sort of take a more unique spin on the background, a unique spin on the stuff, and kind of make it your own, which makes a lot of sense. What are you thinking about? I know you're in the middle of the new edition, and you're doing a lot of work, and not just you, obviously the company's doing a lot of work with testing the new rules and reworking them. What's been kind of the mission around the new rules and the new sort of the reboot or the iteration on the mechanics there? What have you guys been thinking about as sort of the fundamental things you want to look for?
Okay, so part of it is... See, the things that I think are important in gaming, I think if you have a passion for something, that will drive you to really take things to the best they can possibly be. I used to work with a guy who used to say, done is good. And it was like, no, done is not good. Good is good. Done is just done. Right. And I think if you have a passion for something, then you will keep pushing, keep trying to make it the best you can possibly make it. So because of that, under my stewardship, for want of a better word, Wild West Exodus was never going to be a hardcore, competitive, hard-nosed kind of tabletop game. It was never going to be. It was always going. The thing that appealed to me about Wild West Exodus to begin with was the narrative threads and the story, and how potentially, depending on what you were putting on the table, there was why are these two guys hanging out, or what's the story here? So that was something that was appealing to me. But looking at the first edition, and this is one of the things that we were asked during the alpha and the beta, and actually even now after the beta, people were sort of asking, why a new version of Wild West Exodus? Why didn't you just sort of stick a band-aid over the creaky bits of the first edition and just have at it? And it was because the first edition of Wild West Exodus is a good game, and it's a very particular kind of game. It has a very kind of clear identity in itself. But the problem with it is it didn't scale particularly well. If I'm being honest here, it worked really well in kind of if you had like a small bunch of guys, individual guys, kind of doing like a little
like a skirmish game.
Show. Yeah, well, yeah. You see, you see, we say skirmish, but then what's
10 or less models? How's that?
Yeah. So it works well there, but then because again it was created off the back of with Kickstarters and things, and I totally understand why that was the decision taken at the time. Then as part of the model on making a Kickstarter, you have to have stretch goals and other bits and pieces. So you've got this neat skirmishy type Infinity-esque type game, and then you've got giant tanks, and you've got huge monsters and all these other kind of cool things, really cool things, but they don't seamlessly fit into the game. Mm-hmm. And you also have you have the initial factions, which were quite closely made it look like a slightly weird Wild West game. So you had your outlaws, but you had your warrior nation and so on. But then in the next wave, in the second Kickstarter, you're adding the Holy Order.
Right.
You're adding the Watchers, and people are like, "What? I'm sorry, what game is this?" It feels like it's a different game. It doesn't feel like it's the same vision. And the truth is, it is the same game. The vision was there, but it hadn't fully expressed itself in the first edition. In the first Kickstarter. The second Kickstarter added lots of the elements that were kind of making this wider world, but because it hadn't been kind of organically done in one go, it felt unbalanced, and the game mechanics were then unbalanced, and it did need possibly more work than its more ardent fans are comfortable admitting, but it needed a lot of work. So what it was an opportunity. The second edition, so the new Wild West Exodus, is an opportunity to effectively reboot. In some places, it's a hard reboot. In the narrative terms, it's more of a softer reboot. As many aspects of the game that needed fixing. So the sensibilities of the game have been adjusted slightly. That's one of the things I'm actually the most proud of. So Wild West Exodus, and this is something Craig's been and others, but have been really good at. Wild West Exodus, the first edition was more like guys playing cowboy. It was very much almost like, it felt more like kind of like a John Wayne or The Unforgiven, or because it was more based in the way the world really was back then. Right. So we're told. It was very much that kind of more centric in that way to that kind of worldview of the kind of the early 20th century, late 19th century. That kind of the attitudes and sensibilities and so on. But I think because it's a game. Look, it's a game that's got werewolves in it, and it's got magic, and it's got aliens and all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff. So actually, can we not push the fantasy a little bit more and say, well, what if there had been other changes as well in the background? What if socially things were more? So in other words, it was more of a 21st century outlook on the world, but in the 1870s. So that if women could have a more equal role in there, that kind of the more underrepresented peoples had more of a role to play. I mean, we won't pretend that that it's all peace and sunshine and harmony and everybody gets on perfectly. In fact, the opposite. But I just think there's more stories, there's more interesting narrative that can kind of spin out from giving different types of characters more of a prominent role, rather than it in first edition. It tended to be you had a kind of a hero character for each of the factions, and everybody else was kind of like a background, like a second string. I think in second edition we've got the opportunity to kind of make that narrative richer, and in doing that, bringing more characters and different kinds of characters to the fore. And the community has been brilliant in that regard, in kind of working with us and sort of sharing that. So as part of that, though, in terms of the changes, it was about giving the different factions agency and reason for doing what they're doing. In first edition, it was largely the forces of good, such as they were, against the Dark Council, and the Dark Council were pulling the strings and influencing and corrupting and causing it, basically largely polarizing the game between the two sides, good versus evil, which is great. But in second edition, it's kind of a lot grayer. So it's more, there are no good guys really all the factions think they're the good guys, which is, I think, the important thing. There's no moustache twirling villainy in there, not really. I mean, those that do it's a bit tongue in cheek. So there's no true evil, but there's no so the heroes in Exodus are flawed. The villains, though, have redeeming things, or you can empathise why they're doing what they're doing. Nobody's just being evil for the sake of being evil and then wake up one day and go, I know, I'm going to destroy the world. Right. That's crazy. Why? Who does that? So, so that adding that empathy, adding that kind of that richer narrative, and then so whatever faction you play, you should understand why your faction is the best faction and why they're doing what they're doing. So it was an opportunity to do that, to kind of add those reasons why. So because of that, it meant that the factions needed to be readjusted slightly to kind of fit in. Particularly, some of the factions were not fully expressed in first edition, so they were kind of more of a stub as to what they could be. And so they've become, so particularly factions like the Order, the Watchers have become a very specific thing now, and much more detailed, quite rich in terms of their background and their purpose and things. So that's, again, something we've been able to do. But all of this is narrative stuff, and the reason I started with narrative and talking about the story is because that was the main reason that the rules changed, because the rules represent the world now, rather than it being a neat game system that it could be Wild West setting that we've pasted onto it, or it could be something else. The game engine has been worked so that it's designed for that kind of very fast-paced narrative, quick, brutal, bloody type of game. So lots of the kind of more granular, slower aspects of first edition went by the wayside to kind of give way to that slightly faster-paced game. And so that then allowed us to make some I think the polite way is courageous choices when it came to rules design on some aspects, which again, from a commercial point of view, I love people talking about going, you're crazy. There's no wounds in the game, or what do you mean, what do you mean that the rules only that use, you've got some kind of weird poker chip system going on, or you only use one template for all sorts of different types of effects and all. There's lots of little aspects. What do you mean that if I activate my guys, I don't necessarily know if they're going to be able to work the way I wanted them to work?
Right.
But I rather than kind of not enjoying those I love those conversations because they show, for good or for ill, they show that the game, there are aspects of the game that are not normal. You're not just picking up a bucket of D6s and hurling them at your opponent and just taking off trays of models. There's something else going on in the game, and I'm very pleased about that.
Excellent. That's very cool. It sounds like I like the idea of going from, the concept of what the world is and then building the rules around that rather than having a mechanic and trying to build a rule around that. Well, that's awesome, Stuart. So I know we could talk to you for hours about all the different changes and mechanical changes, but what are a couple that you're really the proudest of? What are some of the things that you really are pleased with how they turned out in the new edition?
I really love the action and adventure deck. I think that's a mechanic that I'm really proud of. When we were doing the initial alpha testing, and it's my fault. I hadn't run an alpha test for the game before, so I brought it out and I exposed people to different mechanics a part at a time, because I figured almost like fixing a car or something that people could work on the individual components rather than on the whole. So they get their head around the individual bits, and then we piece it all together, and there'll be like this eureka moment, and everyone goes, "Oh, I see how it all works." But actually, what happened was they started off with some of the aspects, and they were like, "Oh, this game is so broken; it doesn't work. It's terrible," because they in their head, like I mentioned about gamers, we like kind of jumping ahead and filling in the gaps and exploring things. They were fleshing the game out in their head, and they were having a piece of the puzzle and going, "Oh, okay, so it must look like this, the final game. It's terrible. I hate it." To be fair, there's still some people that say that, but but once the action adventure deck, once I sort of explained that and showed that to the alpha test group, there was a collective kind of light in people's head, particularly the adventure deck, where people got suddenly how it all clicks together. Because there are aspects of the game that I absolutely get are not for everybody. So if you enjoy knowing exactly what everything in your army is going to do and being able to predict what everything in your army is going to do and being able to, like in chess. So in chess, everything has very specific moves. It will always be able to do those moves. It will always be available for when you're able to do your turn. So if you like that very clean, precise, ordered, structured way of gaming, you will not enjoy Wild West Exodus. It is not that kind of game. If, on the other hand, you like games where you have to turn to turn, you have to think more on the fly, you have to kind of reorganize your battle plan because some things haven't worked out the way you wanted, or suddenly there's been an unexpected boon that you can take advantage of, and if only I'd deployed that over there, I could have taken advantage of that better, or next time I'll make sure I've got these units in place, because if I do get this unexpected bonus, or if there is this something disastrous happens, I'll be able to kind of cope with that and deal with that. Then absolutely Wild West Exodus is the game for you, because it's all about that. It's all about the chaos and confusion of the battlefield, and I think a very wise person, for them, chaos is a ladder, whereas for others, chaos is something that will sweep you away, and you'll just sit there with your head in your hands and weep. So
that's the ladder. Foreshadowing. That's
indeed.
Awesome.
So the action adventure deck, and very, very briefly, if I just so the action deck, what that does. So when you activate a unit in Wild West Exodus, so everything's a unit, be it a unit of one man. So when I talk about units, I get somebody saying, "Oh, is Wild West Exodus an army game?" I'm not sure what an army game is. If they mean like a game like Warhammer or Warhammer 40,000, yeah, it's definitely not. You are playing with maybe 20 models, something like that. It's not an army game. If you've got 2 squads of Space Marines or a big regiment of Goblins, you've got more models probably than you're ever going to use in a game of Exodus. But certainly it's everything is organised into units. So like your boss, a single model, he's a unit. He's just a unit of one thing. So units have a number of actions that they can carry out in a turn, and that's fine. And whatever actions you choose to do, it's not like some of the more organised or ordered games where you have a movement phase and then a shooting phase and then a close combat phase. You get to choose what actions you're doing with your units. So when you activate, you go, I'm actually not going to move at all. I'm just going to do lots and lots and lots of shooting. I'm just going to keep shooting till I run out of actions and what have you. And that's fine. You can do that. Or you can do lots of moving, or you can do a combination, or whatever you want to do. It's quite free in that regard. But to fuel those actions, you have action points. To get your action points, when you are about to activate a unit, but this is the important bit, but before you announce, you may in your head know what unit you want to activate, but before you announce what unit you're activating, you draw a card from the top of your action deck. That will have a number on it between 1 and 5, which is awesome. That's the number of action points you get. Usually it's 1 point is for one action. If you want to repeat an action, so do exactly the same type of action again, that will cost you double, so it costs you 2 points. So largely, the number of action points you draw is the number of actions you can do. Some units, so like a unit of hands, which is like your kind of your line troopers kind of thing, they might have a limit of 2, so they can only do 2 actions. So it doesn't matter if you draw 5 action points; they're only going to be able to do 2 actions. But there are other things that you can spend those points on. So in other words, yes, you're only doing 2 actions, but you can really, if you're lucky and you've got a lot of action points to spend, you could spend a lot of those points to making those actions very, very successful. But I mentioned that you don't have to announce what unit you're activating. So actually, you may want to activate, Odysseus Grant or Hawks Looking, or one of your characters, one of your big combat monsters, or something like that. And so in a perfect world, you're going to draw that 5, and away you go. You're going to steamroller through. You're in perfect position to really get stuck in, and you draw a 2, and you're like, oh God, yeah, what are we going to do with that? Well, you haven't announced. You haven't in your head. You might now be thinking, I can't really do that because I'm either going to activate Walks Looking, and rather than her scything through people with her spirit blades, she's going to kind of probably move a bit and maybe stab somebody through the head, and that'll be it. So I could either do that, and from a narrative point of view, that's explained that either she's ill prepared, or there's a distraction, or there's something else is going on in the battlefield, which means that she's not fighting at full strength. But it's your choice if you do that. The far better would be that you actually Walks Looking. I'm not going to activate Walks Looking this turn. I'll activate this unit of young bloods, which are kind of like the young, cocky, brand new teenager, Warrior Nation teenagers. So I'm going to activate them because they only have a limit of 2, and I've got 2 points. That's cool. We'll have some fun. We'll go shout at some stuff. So you do that instead. The only time that's ever going to be, you're not going to have that choice because you have to activate everything in your army. So the only time that's not going to be a choice is if you've activated everything else in your army except for Walks Looking, and then she's like the last thing to activate. Yeah, she's your prize fighter. You've left her till last, and then you draw in the card. Well, that's a strategic choice you made when you were deciding what order to activate your stuff in. So if it doesn't play out to your way, then that's the risk you take, I'm afraid. But then you also have plenty of opportunity because the cards are random. You have plenty of opportunity with the 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 units. So that number of draws you've been making on the deck over the course of the game round, you had every opportunity when you drew that 5 or 4 to have activated Walks Looking, but for whatever reason you chose not to. So again, you reap what you sow. Nobody's. It's not one of these things where you just, I draw a 2, so now I've got to activate my boss, and my boss is always going to be rubbish because I'm always going to draw a 1 or a 2. your boss is only rubbish, or your boss is only playing that way if your tactical choices you have made during the game have led you to that point. Yeah.
Well, I like how if you have a large number of units, you're going to have more tactical options, and you'll be able to really maximize those power units. But as your army gets whittled down, your ability to be tactical in that way and mitigate that luck is going to get reduced, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the action deck. But the thing that and the other bit that I was very proud of is the adventure deck. So the adventure deck, was the bit that set the light bulb off in people's heads, because with the adventure deck, what that lets you do, so that is it's a hand of cards that you have during each game round, and you can refresh the hand, but you can dump cards out. It's your hand. You get to look at them. You get to put them in any order you like. You can spend them at any point. And what they are, there's two sides to the card. There's guts and there's glory. Okay, so guts is about seizing the opportunity to change the rules of the game slightly. And so by that I mean, so what guts will let you do is guts will give you a bonus. So it might be you might get a bonus to your to one of your attributes. So like be +1 to your quick, so your ability to move. And you can play that card. You can play the guts part of that card at any time on a unit to give it that bonus when it activates. So there are other cards that count as an action point. So again, you could have 2 or 3 cards that you've kept back in your hand, which are all action point cards. So actually, when Walk's looking, if you have, for whatever your strategic reason is that you've left it right to the end, and then I've drawn that too, it's okay. I've got 2 or 3 action point cards in my hand, so I'm going to actually spend them as well when I activate. So she's not going to be terrible. Actually, she'll be pretty okay. Yeah.
Yep.
What it also lets you do though is be filth, and you've got your 5 and Walk's looking, and you've done this fairly early on in the game, and you've got your 5, and actually go, you know what? I'm actually going to throw in another couple of action points. So I'm going to have like 7 action points. She's still limited by the number of actions that she can do, because there is a limit to how many actions the model can take, or the unit. But when she attempts those actions, good grief, she is able. She will be, slicing people in half. She'll be ripping tanks apart. You can really, really fuel her up if you want to go for the really heroic stuff, the really narrative stuff. And the guts part of the deck lets you do that. So it lets you either sort of guard against fortune kind of urinating on your eider down, but it also allows you to kind of maximize when you have that kind of the action deck. You draw a good card, you can really fly with it, because you can either boost some stats as well, or you can have extra fuel for your abilities, and there are other things as well. There's abilities that like you can chain activations. You actually can activate another unit off the back of activating that unit that you're working on, and so on. So there's all sorts of things that the guts will let you do. So it's great.
It sounds awesome. I definitely.
But I said
you've got me really excited now to try the game again. I got to come back to it. I still have all my Wild West Exodus stuff. So those 2 mechanics alone seem like they're worth checking it out. We're running a little long here, but Stuart, I do want to ask, what's the next hotness coming for Wild West Exodus from Wayland? What should people be looking out for in the next few weeks here?
Okay, so we've got we're at the launch point of 2nd edition. So 2nd edition has got a whole bunch of new products coming out. And one of the things, when going back to the narrative side of things, where you have when we're talking about bosses and why these characters together. So the idea of, in 1st edition, you would have a boss to lead your army, a bit like a warcaster or a Space Marine captain or whatever, depending on what game you're playing. In Wild West Exodus, bosses are an important part of the game, but they are not unique. Also, they are unique, but they're not solitary in the game. You can have multiple bosses in your army. So what they do, a boss has a posse, which is a themed group around them, which have kind of mixed into the flavour of whatever that boss is particularly good at. So even if you have, say, a Union army, or each of the bosses in the Union army has their own posse, has their own theme, their own feel to them. So because they have particular areas that they're expert in. So you can have Abraham Lincoln with his Secret Service, all agents and things, or you can have Grant with his hideous bombardments and artillery, or Willa Shaw with her sort of like X Games Iron Horses, as leading an entire kind of cavalry force, and so on. So you have all that. So with our releases that we've got coming up, we've got the beginning of a new type of product that we're releasing, which are the posse sets.
Oh, cool.
And what they are is they're a boss, lovely boss miniature, and then a number of units that will go with them. So they're like they're like starter forces, for want of a better word, but they're also, you can group them together and form larger armies, or you can just take the boss with a posse and then take other units to kind of expand it if you want. You can really, they're the core building block of playing the game. Alongside those, so we've got 5 of those coming out in September. But then, so 5 bosses with posses, so that's going to be really cool, each one for a different faction. But then alongside those, we've also got we've got a what they call a gubbins box, or a rules and gubbins box, which is basically the rule book, and then the action adventure deck that I mentioned, poker chips, dice. There's a little measuring stick in there, tokens, templates, the whole shebang that you need to play the game. So that's coming out in a little handy dandy box. But then the other thing that we've got coming out are the posse sets. So for example, you could have Tribal Retribution, which is Walk's looking, that I mentioned. So it's a whole themed posse for her. But there's Tribal Retribution starter set, which is, so you get that posse, but then you also get a rule book with it, you get the dice, you get all the cards and everything else. So if you wanted to jump on board with Wild West Exodus, there is a themed starter set for 5 of the factions, and we'll have that ready to go. So we've got 5 starter sets essentially coming out in September, which is nice for people getting on board. It's a fantastic way to go. And then I know, because I've seen the release schedule, that we've then got, over the next 3 4 months, we've then got another 4 or 5 posse sets. So you will have by the end of the year, and sort of end of winter, you will have like 10, 11 different starter sets for the game, which if anybody wanted a way to get into the game, I would be surprised if they didn't find one that suited them. So that's something I'm really excited that we've got coming out over the next few months.
Well, that's exciting. It sounds like you've got all the bases covered there. You got easy way to expand your army based on posses. You got the starter box for those who might have their stuff but want all the new bits and tricks. And then, of course, you got the starter set, which has everything you need to jump into the hobby if you haven't been a Wild West Exodus person before. It sounds like all the options are covered. Plus,
like
if your
every
favorite
possible angle,
exactly, and your favorite faction's coming soon if it isn't out in the next few weeks. So that's awesome. Well,
yeah, I hope so.
It sounds great, Stuart. Thank you so much for filling us in here on your gaming journey, plus all the details on Wild West Exodus. We're going to take a quick break here. We'll hear from Total Fangirl. When we come back, we're going to talk about Mulling Mechanics, Craig. Right, and what?
Yes.
What can you possibly do to mitigate luck? Right, Craig?
That's right. Well, luck can urinate on your eider down. I heard a wise man once say.
I don't.
You want to try to stop that if you can.
I think you probably do.
This is Total Fangirl. Regular Jane most days, Total Fangirl when the moment strikes. Han shot first. Starbuck is a guy. And Lestat, now there's a vampire. Hey everyone, this is Nicole, your Total Fangirl. You can follow me on Twitter at Nicole Wakeland and check out my blog, TotalFangirl.com. This week's shout out is to all of our wonderful supporters over at Patreon. Head to patreon.com/the D6 Generation and you too can support the show. At this very moment, the Wakeland household is frantically packing for Gen Con. Actually, that's not entirely true because my youngest daughter is the only one among us who is packed. I can hear Russ creaking, the floor creaking over my head as Russ is walking around packing, and I get to pack last after I finish recording this segment for the podcast. And then we will all packed and ready to go. And this year's a little bit crazy how we're getting there. Normally all 4 of us are driving down together, but through a combination of different things, that's not how it's working at all. Only 3 of us are going. And initially, only 2 of us are actually in the car, and those 2 are me and my youngest daughter. So it's just the 2 of us. And Russ has our car packed full of all the stuff that he needs for Gen Con. So there's like a dolly to carry the big crates for the Play by Mob giveaways, and there's banners, and there's his suitcase. And when I looked at it today, he was showing me, this is the space we have, because it's like a game of Tetris to fit things in there. You put your bag here, and then she can put her bag there. And I'm hoping that we can make everything fit. And my youngest is pretty excited, and I think she was initially excited. She's like, "Oh yeah, it's going to be me and you." But I've come to realize that it might not be, because I'm like, yes, mommy-daughter time, and I'm an awesome mom, and she loves me, although she does, and I am awesome. But that she's going, yes, the whole road trip, I don't have to do anything that my sister wants to do. It's all going to be about her on the way down. So we're looking forward to that bit of it. And then on the way home, as I was listening to Russ describe how I was supposed to fit everything in the car with the remainder of the allocated space that is available to me and my youngest, he was saying, okay, and then on the way back, this and this are going to be empty, so we'll put these inside of each other, and then we'll have room to put things in the way that we want to put them in, and then we can flip one of the seats back, because on the way home, there will be 3 of us. Right now, you can't fit can only fit 2 humans in the car. There's no room for a 3rd human. So we have to find a way to get rid of stuff. Play by Mom, that's where a lot of stuff will go. But then, if any of you have ever seen Russ wandering around at Gen Con, you'll know that he has a tendency to buy a few things there. And normally those few things end up getting shoved right back in the car, and we have a little trailer in the back. Well, he seemed to think we can fit it all in the car this year because we have one less person. So I was looking at the size of the bins and thinking about how much stuff Russ buys, and he's telling me this whole grand plan. And I keep thinking that this is how it's going to go on Sunday morning when we go to leave, that we're going to be all packed, we're going to be ready. He's like, I just got to bring down this last thing. It's all going to fit. And he's going to realize that he's still packed the car with no longer the things for Play by Mob, but the things he has purchased. And there are only room for 2 people, and that one of us is going to have to ride on the roof. And I can tell you right now, it's not going to be me, and it's not going to be my daughter. It just might end up being Russ.
You're listening to the Dice Tower Network at Dicetowernetwork.com. More fun than Merchant of Venus. Wait, what?
Who writes these?
Hey, welcome back. And now, we haven't mulled mechanics in a while, Craig. I think it's time for some mechanical mulling. It's almost fall. We're getting closer to fall, Craig. School is almost going to start again.
I don't even want to talk about it.
And when fall comes, so comes the mulled wine, the mulling, and the mulling of the mechanics. And since Stuart's here, and Stuart is we learned earlier that Stuart has played quite a few games. Stuart, is that fair to assess quite a few games?
1 or 2, yes, that's fair.
Yeah, and we talked about this a little bit. Stuart, you like sort of the narrative games. I like narrative games, but there is such a thing as too much luck in any game, I think. And so I thought we'd talk a little bit about that concept of, how much luck is too much, and what do we like in games that kind of is there to mitigate luck. But I thought before we get to the luck mitigation, why have luck in games at all? Why not just have chess?
But what do you? When we're talking about luck, what do we mean? Are we talking about probability of things? Are we talking about like the randomness of things, or are we talking about luck in the sense of you need a good thing to happen in order to make progress?
I think of it as randomness.
Okay.
I need to get lucky in a die roll, but that's not necessarily the only way to think. I don't know, Craig, how do you think of it?
I always thought of it as when in a negative way, I always think of it as randomness. Mm-hmm. I look at games where no matter what you do, there's going to be some aspect of it that might just totally turn everything around, and it just doesn't matter, and there's nothing you can do to stop that from happening. So that would be my negative impression of luck.
What do you think, Stuart? How do you define it?
Yeah, well, I mean, okay, if we're talking about luck, then I suppose you say I see luck as being a positive thing, so that you're trying to positively influence the outcome of something. But I mean, it's interesting because when we talk about luck and we talk about probability, and Craig just mentioned like randomness, and that's all really true. But every game has randomness, and I think sometimes it's more about how much of an illusion of control a game creates for you, because the moment you've got two people playing, you've immediately got, even chess has random elements to it, because though you might be able to predict what an individual piece does, because a piece can only work in a particular way, you cannot know necessarily what your opponent is going to do. You can guess, and you can kind of make an educated guess, because you might think, well, logically that's what I would do, or I think this is an obvious thing that I've opened up, or whatever. So you get the illusion that you can almost play chess on a psychological level with somebody. But fundamentally, if somebody wanted to just do something bizarre, they could do, and that would be an element of randomness, far less than in
that's a good point.
A game.
I think I would say I think I would adjust it slightly, because in my definition of luck, you're right. I think there's two things. There's predictability and there's luck, right? So what I'm thinking about is think of a game like Candyland, right, or Chutes and Ladders, where quite frankly there's very little control of your own destiny, because the game is pretty much dictated by rolls of dice, right? There isn't in Candyland. There's maybe two decisions, because there's basically two forks, and they're really false decisions because it's all really about dice rolls anyway, right? Mm-hmm. So so in chess, I can't predict what my opponent will do, but there is certainty in my own action, right? Like if I go to move, so I think where I think about luck, it's really is how confident. I think two things. Whilst I'm playing the game, how can I be confident what I'm trying to do will work out? Because if the answer is nothing I do will really change the outcome, it's just a die roll, then I'm just playing to be social. I'm not playing to be strategic, right? And then the second part is at the end of the game, win or lose, do I feel like I accomplished something? So if I win at Candyland, there's not a lot of satisfaction there, because I didn't really do anything. And if I lose at Candyland, I'm not really sure I felt like I did anything wrong, or I could have learned from how I played the game, because again, it's all dice rolling. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. But yes, it absolutely makes sense. I go back to what I was saying about the illusion of control though, that you have. So I mean, you take a game where you might think that because of the way probability works, you see, if I understand you right, what you're saying is that essentially the more random things are, the less control you have, and therefore almost you might as well, or it doesn't need you to play, because essentially the game would just kind of randomly resolve itself in a particular way anyway, and you can't necessarily take a great deal of credit for a victory or take any blame for defeat, because fundamentally you have no control over how that game was going to turn out anyway, the more random it is. Is that largely what?
Yes, I would say that's the extreme example of a game with too much
straw man argument. Absolutely.
Yes, exactly. But there are games like that. I would argue that Candyland is that game. It doesn't really matter who's rolling the dice, right?
Yeah, but I mean, okay. So again, I'll go to my. There are games where Warhammer 40,000, as we, it's a game where probably all three of us are familiar with, has a lot of elements of randomness to it, and because everything's based around effectively a six-sided dice or die, the extremes are less, because it's actually a much narrower range of numbers that you kind of go in between. But I think, even though there's loads of these little cubes of chance flying around the table, you have masses of control over what you can do, because it's about, you can, through tactics, through your deployment, through your army choices, through your actions, because you cannot control what those dice are going to roll, but you can, either by rolling more of them, or ensuring that you've got, the score that you're looking for is different. You can kind of swing things because you can't, unless you're cheating, you can't control probability in that regard. You can't make the dice roll a particular thing, but you can increase or make the environment to which you're playing more favourable. So in other words, to quote our friend Littlefinger, chaos is a ladder. So actually, when everything is in flux, I actually think that is where real strategy and tactics come through, because there are many things you can't control. So it's about ensuring that with those rogue and random elements, with that element of luck flying around on the table, that you have, through your army choice, through everything else, that you have built things to kind of either take advantage of the winds of fortune if they're in your favour, or to guard yourself against things working against you. Now, I accept that in some games, because they're quite simplistic and literally the things that you can do to swing things in your favour are very, 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 very small, that actually, yes, so Candyland and things, there is very little you can do to kind of put things in your favour. But
I agree. So I think what you hit upon is exactly, I would agree with 100%. With the idea is that in most situations in life, you don't have complete control. So for a game to simulate the fact that or to simulate anything that's even remotely real, you would have to have some luck elements. And the real where strategy comes in is just like in real life or real war or anything. It's not about having the perfect plan that doesn't ever change. It's about how do you mitigate all the risks and how do you adapt and overcome things that happen unexpectedly, right? So for luck to have to really make the experience cool, and I think you do need luck. I think there's a reason that games like 40K for a lot of us is more fun than chess, is because of the luck, because of the craziness that can happen. But I think to make it really compelling, there needs to be options to mitigate the luck, right, in some way. And you gave some great examples, through army construction or if there's enough dice volume, then statistics start to kick in.
It's a quality in all of itself.
Exactly. So I'm with you 100%. I think, and that kind of gets us to the topic, right? It's like I think luck is only valuable in a game if there's ways you can mitigate it. So in Candyland, there's really no way to mitigate the luck, so it's not as fun as it would be if there was some way to at least modify my movement with some kind of choices I could make, right?
Yes.
That kind of thing. Whew, that's good. Oh, well, great. This is going to be great. So
there we go. We've solved it. Well done, guys.
Well, we know what we like. But so here's the thing, though. So what are some mechanics that we like, that we've seen in games either historically or recently? And I do think you're seeing a lot more of this than you may be used to. So if you think about some of the early miniature gaming, because they were based a lot I'm thinking of Games Workshop in particular on role-playing games, but I don't want to pick on them too much. But if you remember the early Rogue Trader, that was an entirely, like, the whole chaos was completely generated randomly, right? Like, it was just like whole buckets of just random happened. And if you were very lucky, an interesting story came out of it, right? Now, of course, they've evolved on that, and now there's some mitigation. So what are some of your favorite mechanics, Stuart, you've seen historically that you think are really kind of interesting ways to kind of handle the luck concept?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at a game like Gates Antares or Bolt Action, or see, one of the things I like is where, because gaming has loads of conceits, there's loads of things that because gaming's been around now for several generations in its current kind of form. I mean, obviously gaming's been around for as long as people have been around, but gaming in terms of what we think of gaming, tabletop gaming, is it's got several generations of quite a lot of commercial focus and game design, and people trying to make a living out of it. So you're seeing there are some things that now we just take for granted that games are going to treat certain things in certain ways. And so and I say, I'll give an example, only because it's obviously one that I've been thinking about, like wounds. So with and that's kind of a mitigation. So a bad dice roll in most games, so in War Machine, in Warhammer 40,000, if you get a bad dice roll, your normal guy is probably going to go splat and die, and that's the end of them. But your hero, your character, is probably going to survive because they've got this abstract notion that because they're more senior, they somehow live longer and are tougher. I mean, my dad he was a senior officer in the police. I don't think his higher rank made him any more invulnerable to damage than, in fact, actually, obviously, as he was approaching retirement, he was probably more vulnerable to damage than the kind of the PCs that were the kind of officers on the ground kind of thing. So, in real life, that idea, the notion of wounds, is actually, it's a complete artifice. It doesn't exist in real life, really. Yeah. But in gaming, we absolutely accept that as being a way to mitigate. So it stops your 200 point, 300 point, 15 point, whatever the game mechanic, cost mechanic is, character, your key guy, your warcaster, from getting knackered by a dagger in the dark, and that being the end of it. So, so we accept mechanics like that. And what I like is when we go, because most games use wounds as a way to mitigate against or to ensure that characters and heroes and whatever live longer. And in fact, Warhammer 40,000 takes it further, and your tanks and things have wounds to live longer. I'm interested, and Exodus does do that in a different way, but so does Bolt Action, so does Antares, where everything just has one wound. Or in the Exodus case, you have no wounds. You don't have wounds, and any shot can kill you, which is kind of like real life. And instead, it's more about, do they have fortune, or do they have some other mechanic? So, in other words, other than wounds, is there some other mechanic in there to keep them, to keep them alive, to keep them going? Be it like force of will, be it the ability to jump out the way, some kind of better protection of equipment. And people, I remember in Warhammer, you had your lookout, sir, where your scrote was throwing himself in front of the crossbow bolt or whatever at the last minute to save the general. And that I find really interesting. I think it's when where games don't go for the relatively easy or the well-trodden path. And in fairness, it's a well-trodden path usually because it's probably the most practical way of resolving the dilemma, but where games don't do that and they do try something a little bit different. So, Antares, there's lots I love the background of Antares. There's parts of the game itself that I'm not so keen on, but the way it deals with the wounding and things is refreshing. I think that it's a really interesting way of mitigating misfortune.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I think that's a great one. I hadn't really thought about wounds as being a luck mitigator, but you're absolutely right. If you it's sort of an easy way to say, well, I like this piece not to die accidentally, so I'll just increase its wound count and really reduce the likelihood that will happen, right? So that's a pretty interesting way to look at it. And I like the games like it, like you're mentioning, that come up with new ways to think about those sorts of things. And I remember when I first started playing Antares and Bolt Action, I know Craig and I both were like, wow, that's weird. Right, but then but what's also interesting about that is, in other ways to, and I think you hit on another thing there too, Stuart, this idea that how you build your list and maybe how things can be attached to other things can mitigate luck, right? So if you can put a unit with a hero, and if there are mechanics in the game where the unit with the hero dies first, now you can take the hero maybe as a solo, but if you attach a unit to him, now he or she's more survivable because the unit gets hit first. Rune Wars is an example of how this might work too, right? But what's also interesting is, this idea that you can mitigate it with rerolls, right? So I think one of the things Antares has is you can spend more points to get more essentially armor rerolls, right? And sort of a neat way to. So spending on, and that's kind of another kind of. And I'm interested in what you think, Stuart. Is this a cop out or kind of a clever idea where you can essentially have a resource that builds rerolls into the game? So 40K now, 8th edition has this with the command points. And other games, you can spend points to buy rerolls or buy repulls from the dice bag in Antares or Bolt Action, for example, to try to mitigate the luck of not getting initiative when you need it. How do you feel about resources to sort of buy your way out of a jam?
It's not a new thing because Blood Bowl had that with you got team rerolls back in. So we're going back to the 80s. But Battlefleet Gothic had you had re-rolls and things. Spartan Games, Dystopian Wars has Commodore's re-rolls and things. Right. So it's a thing. Personally, I don't like the idea of buying the rolls in the abstract because what are you doing? Because in real life, I keep saying real life, but we have to. But it doesn't matter if a game's all about fantastical starships or whatever. It has to have some relatable thread to it, because actually, if everything's a variable and up for grabs and weird and wacky, you've got nothing to hold on to. Then it just becomes like staring at an abstract painting or whatever. It's all madness. And then if it's all madness, then none of it really matters. So I think you do have to have some. Well, that's not realistic, for want of a better word, or that's not. People's behaviours aren't realistic. Oh well, a trained soldier wouldn't behave that way, and so on. So I think the idea of arbitrarily spending part of your army cost, your army list on this, almost like making a sack. If you had a cult army and you were making some kind of bargain with the dark gods to gain their favour, I totally would be behind that, because there's a really in character, because you are receiving the boon of the gods kind of thing. But if it's just like your imperial commander or the German high command is investing in more rerolls, that just seems strange. I do like the idea though of having that ability to reroll as being in the same way of like command points and things, it being an aspect of a model that you're getting on board. And actually sometimes that can be the thing that model's really good at. So he might not be a great fighter. He might, like Tyrion in Game of Thrones, he may not be, on the battlefield, he's not bringing a lot to the table, but you do still want to take him because he has these intangible, more supportive benefits or tactical, strategic benefits.
You kind of like the idea of what happens now in 8th edition with the Imperial Guard and the commanders, right? Because they can give an order and say, you can reroll ones when you shoot, or you can reroll. You can move a little extra when you move. So it's kind of like if there's a really strong thematic reason as to why that synergy should exist, and what's interesting about that, I like in particular, is that it gives your opponent what I like about intermodels, sort of like model synergies that mitigate luck. What I like about that a lot is it gives your opponent a tactical option. Right? So, me as a player, if I don't like the fact that the guard are wildly inaccurate in 40K, I can buy more commanders to help improve their accuracy or increase their rate of fire, which essentially is effectively both, right? However, if I, as the opponent of the Imperial Guard player, hate the fact that he's getting really high volume there, I can do tactics that require him to spread his guys out, so maybe he can't get all that synergy going, or I can actively get snipers and try to shoot his guy. So what I really like, and I think this is where you were going, Stuart, is that when you put it on the table, when you put the luck mitigation on the table, it does two things. One, you have a way to mitigate your own luck, and two, it gives your opponent a really cool tactical objective that may even be part of the main mission, but it may be something you go for to help mitigate that luck.
Yeah, absolutely. So in my example of the calling in the favour of the dark gods, where it really should be, though, is it some kind of shrine on the table or some kind of beating drum or something like that, something tangible which your opponent has a chance to take care of. And actually, when we're talking about luck, it's not just in that kind of the reroll aspect, but it's like in, again, with Imperial Guard in previous editions, where you could get that kind of like your off-board bombardments and things. You're paying points for heavy artillery that you have no model for, which means that your enemy, it doesn't matter if it's more inaccurate, your enemy can't do anything to stop you from pie-plating them to death, basically, because you've invested in all these weapons that aren't on the table, so can't be hurt. But what I like games, again, like Bolt Action and things like that, where you have to have a spotter on the table. You actually have to have somebody on the table, and that's the person. Well, if I can take the spotter out, then he can't call his artillery in. So I can influence something that otherwise I have no control over, which again is a form of luck.
Right, so you can disrupt their command and control, which I love. I think that's a great point. I like those synergies being built in as well. Craig, what are some of your favorite luck mitigators?
Well, when I'm thinking about luck mitigation, I'm usually thinking about those dice rolls. And I like games that, rather than just using the straight up 6d6 like that, like for instance, as much as I don't like about War Machine, although it's a good game and I do enjoy it when I play it, I do enjoy the fact that most of the rolling is not just one die roll, it's two die rolls added together, which mitigates that luck somewhat. So one die roll going off and one die roll being strong would average it together. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah.
Well,
So I think right there is some luck mitigation and that goes back to what Stuart was saying a while ago, the bucket of dice, right? The more dice you roll, the more likely you are to be hitting the average numbers by the end, so that luck will not so much come into it, and it will be more your strategy and your tactics and your choices that are making the call. So I think rather than you could do that in two ways, just have lots of different dice over the course of the game, or like War Machine does in most of your skill rolls, to hit rolls and things like that, you're rolling 2 dice, so that that's built into there as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think and I think this kind of takes us to the next point, which is the amount of dice you roll does mitigate luck in some way, because the more you roll, the more theoretically statistics sort of averages out. But the second thing I like is about War Machine in particular. War Machine has my favorite luck mitigation mechanic, which is the boost mechanic, right? So, and to your point, Stuart, they've baked it into the game system, and they've baked it into the fluff and mythology, where you have these powerful sort of magical warcasters, and they can infuse their magical energy and mitigate luck a couple different ways. They can infuse that energy into these giant robots, and so when the robots attack, you can have certain attacks get an extra die roll, an extra additive die roll to increase the result overall. So it's not a reroll; it's actually taking something that you're rolling 2 dice and hoping you get a number, higher than 7 and 8, and now you're rolling 3 dice and still hoping you're getting a sum higher than 7 or 8. So it really increases the probability, and really you don't get a lot of those, but you get enough of them to really choose when the hit has to matter, and you can choose to boost that either on the attack roll or the damage roll. So you can mitigate luck to hit, but you can also mitigate and do a lot of extra damage in case there's a high wound model kind of thing, which is really interesting. But also, that same caster can keep that power in himself and actually give himself bonus damage boxes, essentially, reduce attacks against him to mitigate the chance of being one-offed. So it's kind of an interesting way to do it. And they've really, and then they introduced hordes, but the entire game becomes very interesting and compelling because of that sort of boost mechanic.
Definitely. And
I think Malifaux, the guys at Weird, saw how that was done, and then did it even more cleverly and really interestingly with cards, into the point where there's, again, similar things where models on the table are allowing you, first of all, you've got a hand of luck. So what's interesting about cards is essentially at the start of your turn, this is always fascinating me about Malifaux. At the start of your turn, you're looking at all your dice rolls for the turn, right? So you literally have your hand of dice rolls already rolled. You can look in your hand and say, I got 2 6s, a 7, and a 5, if I'm comparing them to whatever. And then I get to choose in which combats, which of those rolls I'm going to apply. So that right there is already luck mitigation. But then you have energies that your leaders also have, similar Warcasters and War Machine, which allow me to cheat fate and either be additive with cards or even reflip extra cards and add even more power to the attack. So it's a really interesting idea, this idea that I know I get to choose where I'm going to apply my power for the turn. And I can still get bad luck. I get a really terrible hand, right? But odds are I'm going to have at least 1 or 2 good moves in there, kind of like when you were talking about earlier in the show, Stuart, this idea that, when I'm drawing my cards in Wild West Exodus, I might have an opportunity to really decide where to use my action points. Malifaux does it with what am I using for the actual attack chance, right? So I think cards are a really interesting way to mitigate luck because you can kind of choose where to use them, right?
You can, but there's 2 ways that you can. There's lots of ways you can use cards. But there's 2 key ways that you can use cards, and both of them are fascinating. So, on the one hand, you can have a hand of cards, like you mentioned. So, in other words, you have your probability or your spread is in there, and you can apply that. So, again, I go back to what I said about that illusion of control over really something that you don't necessarily have control over, but you do feel, but I've got a hand of cards, so you have no more way of knowing it or dealing with the fact that you've got a handful of 1s than you could have a handful of 10s. You have no real control over that, other than the way that the deck is shuffled. But but the odds
it does
are,
add, just to jump in there, it does add the psychology of poker to the game. Because now I'm looking at my hand, I'm looking at my opponent's eyes, right? And I'm trying to decide, it's kind of like your chess analogy. I don't really know what my opponent's going to do in chess, but I know what he's restricted to doing. So I don't really know what he's holding, but if I can read my opponent, I might, he might have he might be bluffing me and really pulled a bunch of aces, and he's sitting on a fistful of high rolls. But he may not be, and maybe it's now my turn to shine, right? So that's an interesting, just another level of psychology you get from cards you don't have in dice, right?
Yeah, that's true, and that's one of the great advantages of having that hand of cards. But the other way you can do it, see, because with cards, the big difference for me between cards and dice is dice are fixed probability, but the probability resets every time you roll the die.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's 1 to 6 on a 6-sided dice, and then you pick it up, and it's still 1 to 6. With the cards, provided that this is how the action deck works in Exodus, so there's a fixed number of particular. There's a fixed ratio of the various action points in the deck. So actually, if you're starting off and you're just getting ones, and it's so lousy, I'm just getting rubbish draw after rubbish draw. But what's happening is the probability in the deck is changing because by burning through all the low cards, you know that you have got coming up some epic turns when all the cards you're going to be drawing, because you don't reshuffle and recut the deck until you burn through it. So you are actually, to quote the Crow, it can't rain all the time. Yeah, so you're going to eventually that probability in the deck is going to shift in your favour, because if you're having, so if you're having a rubbish first turn, your third or fourth turn is likely to be epic, because it's all going to be 4s and 5s you're drawing, and everybody's suddenly it's like after half time, and the teams had that talk from the coach, and he's smashing heads together, and now they're really getting back in the game. That's with cards when you're working through probabilities, that luck mitigation. If you don't cut the deck and reshuffle, you are actually it will average out. It will eventually work in your favour, and you can plan for that. Then but again, you're not planning before the game starts. You've got this kind of play sheet, and that's one of the things in War Machine I saw, which fills me with dread. Is I've seen people with these play cards, and it's like a little cheat sheet card, and it says, so if this guy is here, then this model needs to be here, and then she needs to move to here, and it's like, oh my god, why would
people are too? I know.
Yeah, but I mean, look, it brings pleasure to a certain kind of gamer, and there's a danger in kind of arrogantly assuming that everybody needs to enjoy games the way you do. Right, but they're wrong. They're just wrong.
Well, it's like it's like the hardcore chess players who, like, as soon as you move a piece, like, oh, that's Kaspar's opening. Well, I know how to, I don't know how to play chess that level. I just move some pieces around and hope I do well.
In 4 moves, and you're like, what? And I think just sat down, buddy. Come on.
Right. Yeah. I think what gets War Machine and Hordes into just interesting territory is that because the luck mitigation is so strong and controllable, it makes the game extremely predictable in certain situations. In what I think competitive gamers would call a good way, like chess is predictable, right? There's a ton of variety. I mean, you can't predict it you're always going to roll 3-1 sometimes. That's just going to happen. But because luck is so mitigatable, it makes the game extremely, extremely strategic to the point where the hardcore player can just dominate the rookie. And that's one of the advantages of not having too much luck mitigation, and that it keeps the game a little lighter, right? So if the game is really, really controllable, the game can get really serious. I think. I mean, that's what I've seen.
See, that's the thing. You see, I really don't like. I don't like, and this shows volumes about me.
Yeah,
I don't like a game where the learning curve is such that effectively you either have somebody that is excellent at the game, that knows the game, or you have everybody else. And that in almost any way you're going to play, the experienced player is likely to really beat 7 bells of whatever out of the relatively inexperienced player, because there are so many known ways that you can mitigate, that you can change the probability and the luck into your favour, that actually you are both playing with a different. You've got the loaded deck and your opponent's got the straight deck, as it were, and really they were never going to be able to win, because it doesn't matter if suddenly they have a bit of good fortune. It's okay, because I've factored that into whatever I've done. And actually, the way that this, there was a dirty trick with Asphyxius in Garsby in seconded in Mark II, where, because I think one of his ranged attacks was an area effect, but it wasn't properly an area effect. So basically, when it scattered, it wasn't half strength, it wasn't half power. So basically, because it could only scatter a certain distance, it's like an inch or something like that, or a couple of inches, and because of the distance of the template, well, it didn't matter. It didn't matter if it scattered; it was still going to rip your face off. So, so people would then, if they knew what they were doing, they would play it in a certain way, and they'd just kill you. They'd assassinate your caster on the second turn.
Yeah, I think they've removed. I think a lot of that's gone, but it's still a game like chess, in that it's in that the master will beat the student every time. It's not a hard game to learn. I've been playing War Machine with my daughter since she was 10.
Sure.
And she loves it, and we play it all the time, but we play it very casually. It's not hard to learn. It's hard to master. I think there are folks who, and this is where I think you made a valid point, where it's not for us to judge what kind of game you should enjoy, because there are people who want games that are masterable, right?
Yep.
Some people would say to you, what's the point of learning a game and practicing every week and playing all the time if a newbie can walk up and defeat me on any given day? I mean, I play every week. I should be better than that guy, right? So there's different ways to look at that.
I'd argue both of you need to have fun in a game.
Exactly.
For the game to be
that's where I would agree with you 100%. Yeah. And I'm with you 100%. So
how dare you?
Right. You should come down and enjoy the game. And I think that's it's both a strength and a weakness of War Machine, right? Is that it is masterable, but that comes at a price if you're not if you don't know how to be a cordial gamer and kind of, bring your game down to the new player, just like any sport, right? I mean, you can, racquetball or anything else. So, but anyway, I didn't want to get to there, although that's a really interesting conversation.
X-Wing's the same, I would say.
Yes, I think X-Wing
in that regard. Yeah,
I think you're right. What are some other luck mitigations we like? I love the example you brought up of the synergies on the table that help things out. I mean, other games have that too. Like War Machine has it with unit attachments, right? So you can add maybe a standard bearer or a leader to a unit, and all of a sudden they've got weapon master, or they can move a little farther, or they can, they're a little more reliable on their armor saves or whatever. So I think that's really fantastic. I'm trying to think of other things we didn't cover in here.
Well, how about when there's trade-offs?
Oh, yes.
Like you're going to get an advantage, but it's going to cost you something. For instance, the initiative cards in Blood and Plunder, right?
Oh, yeah, right. Exactly, yeah.
So you get it's the luck of the draw, where how much, kind of like the new Wild West Exodus, how many activations the unit's going to get. Yep. But it's actually going to cost you, because the more activations you get, more likely the later in the turn you're going to have to go.
Yes.
So again, you've got an advantage balanced with a disadvantage, so that it's sort of mitigating the first half.
Rune Wars does this really well too, right? Sorry, Rune Wars has a similar mechanic where you're locking in the order for a unit, and the order may do a lot of cool stuff, but your initiative's going to be lower, right? So I think I love that, and that's definitely, I love your point earlier, Stuart, where it's the illusion of control, because like in Rune Wars as an example, since it's blind. It's kind of like X-Wing. You're giving blind orders. You think you have the illusion of going first, but you don't really know, because your opponent could do anything to you as well. But I love this idea that you're making a trade during the decision as well. Sorry, Stuart, go ahead.
No. I was just going to say, I mean, and again, and I apologize, I keep using Exodus, but actually, funnily enough, and
that would
this must be
a valid point.
This must be a complete coincidence that you've got me on to talk.
It's total coincidence.
And the subject is luck mitigation.
Of course,
because that's like the thing that Exodus is all about. But
it's almost like somebody thought it out ahead of time.
So you've got the action and adventure deck. So the adventure deck in particular, and I know I've kind of mentioned it. We've talked about the adventure deck, but one of the, as I said, you have the guts and the glory, and the guts being the ability to mitigate fate, as it were, mitigate luck by giving you those bonuses and things. But that's a card you play. You have a hand of cards and you play it. But as I mentioned, so it's a guts or glory. See, the other side of the card is glory, which are more like your in 40k we have your little victory points. So if you destroy a unit of hands this turn, gain 1 victory point and that kind of thing. So yes, you can get these benefits in the game. You can boost your units, so you can mitigate luck. But by going for the guts, you are sacrificing the glory of getting these victory points. So you are you can't have both. You either spend the card to get the victory point that you reckon you can get, which long term is going to win you the game and you'll get the glory, or risk it, don't do that, and instead get yourself the extra action point or the extra point to your grit or your extra aim or fight or what have you. So that's that trade-off. And again, that's where we go back to that illusion of control. But actually it is control. You may not know, because you don't know what cards and things you've got coming on, what the dice rolls are going to be down the line. You don't know what you're potentially sacrificing, but you are definitely sacrificing your options. You are limiting yourself down the road by giving up either a bonus when you really desperately need it because you kind of went for the glory and went for the victory point, or you got that victory point, which ultimately will mean victory in the game, because usually in Exodus games do come down to a victory point one way or the other. So it really could make the difference in the game. But it means that for that particular activation, when you roll your die and you are one off or something like that, or I had one more action point, you've given up that chance because you've gone for the glory rather than the guts. So I think that's something I deliberately made sure we had in Exodus. And there will be other games that have a similar kind of trade-off in there, where you're sacrificing one thing for the other. And I think, just in terms of the people that play, that's something that really, when you're first playing it, okay, cool, I make that decision, and then it's when it haunts you when it comes back. I had a card that could have changed that. Right. And that's the eureka moment that people get when they realise what they've done.
I love that. That's a really cool concept. I really like that a lot. I like when you're trading potential game-winning victory points for something, right? I think that's a great mechanic. Yeah. And one thing we didn't talk about, and I know we're getting a little long here, but one thing I wanted to mention real quick was another form, and I'm curious what you think about this, Stuart, and you, Craig, too. Is having multiple options for victory luck mitigation? So I bring that up because sometimes in a game, right, you think about, you come into a game and you have some fast units to do to get across the board because maybe the mission is all about getting to the other side of the table, or it's an assassinate mission, or you have a lot of guns because it's kill the enemy mission. And if the mission objective never changes and some form of bad luck occurs to you and a key unit you need for that objective dies or gets stuck or whatever, it can be very frustrating. But one of the things I think is really interesting about the new tactical objective cards in 40K is your objectives are constantly changing. You can spend CPs to switch them out, and they could be about getting to your opponent's side or not, or a bunch of different things. And so all of a sudden, what you need to do changes, and it gives you hope and an option to do something else that may not have been that you might need now because of something that went horribly wrong or unexpected elsewhere. Does that feel like a luck mitigating idea?
I was going to let Craig speak next because
I'll take that. I'll take that, Stuart. It doesn't feel like luck mitigation to me, Russ. It feels like good game design. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe that in a way does effectively mitigate luck, because a piece of bad luck might be lessened. The impact of it might be lessened if there's other avenues open for you. But like to go back to something we've talked about in previous recent episodes, for instance, with the Primaris Marines in the starter box for 40K having a very narrow path to victory, you lose that one unit and away it goes. If they had other ways to win, maybe that would be that. But is that bad luck though, or is that good tactics on the other guy's side? I think that's. I like a good game, I think, will offer you multiple ways to achieve victory so that one bad piece of luck wouldn't necessarily derail you. But if you've done bad army design or you're guilty of really bad tactics, then on top of that, maybe one bad rush of luck should do that. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like if you're balancing everything you have on one unit and that unit gets taken out, that's not so much bad luck as it is good tactics on the other guy's side, I would say. So, I would go down with more good game design than luck mitigation.
Okay, but there's an interesting one there though, and so when we're talking about, so a common one in games is that if you, what's the colloquial, table. If you table your opponent,
Right.
if you wipe your opponent out entirely, you win. Doesn't matter what the victory conditions are.
Right.
Doesn't matter what the objective is. If your opponent is wiped out and you still have stuff and your opponent doesn't, you win. Now, I find that's an interesting one because in some ways, again, like, it's a way to mitigate luck. So the game's not going your way because, you know what, he's got loads and loads of the objectives, but I'm just going to smash his face in anyway and I win the game. It's like, in Blood Bowl, you used to have it where the teams would largely split in between two types. You had the ones that played Blood Bowl and then the ones that just murdered and beat up their opponents.
Right.
So you go with the Orcs. Well, the Orcs don't play Blood Bowl. They just hospitalise so many of the enemy that it doesn't matter. They win. For me, and as I now answer my own thing, I'm not so keen on that. I don't like the idea that where almost you can ignore whatever the cool objectives are, and it doesn't matter if you haven't made good army planning, because the only army planning you need to do is I've just taken enough guns to liquidate your army. It doesn't matter.
Enough trick in the case of War Machine, or enough tricks to liquidate a single model.
Yeah, and so it doesn't matter what plans are. It doesn't matter what. Yeah, we can roll for scenario if you like. It's not going to change how I play because I'm just going to kill you. I'm not. For me, I'm not a fan of that. But because again, that's a form of mitigation that I'm not so keen on. But I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I like multiple paths to victory. So I always prefer a game where there's always a chance for me to win. Because if you get into a game, and this goes back to your point earlier, and I don't know if this is luck mitigation or not, Stuart, but if you get into a game where a particularly long game, so you think about a game like 40K, now you're talking about a 4-hour game, right? So if you're sitting down to a 4-hour game and something happens in turn one where you suddenly feel like there's no way for you to win, and there's no changing objectives, now 40K has that, which is good, for you to win, you're basically faced with a choice of conceding and coming across as a poor sport, perhaps, or playing it to the end and really just being miserable because you're basically you've already lost in 10 minutes and you can't. There's nothing you can do. So when there's always at least one secondary objective, it always gives you a bit of hope, and it keeps the game engaging and fun. So I do like that, and I do think it can be a form of luck mitigation. Because it can give you, the more options you have, the more chance you have to do something right, right? And sometimes doing something wrong is not necessarily a tactical decision. It can be you just got a bad roll, like the bad guy charges you and he just got the first turn and there's no way you just rolled bad and your unit died, and now there was no choice made on your part. He got turn one because he rolled it. He moved first because he moved first, and you got a bad die roll and armor save, and that was the end of that unit. And for whatever reason, that was really key to the overall objective that you got dealt, because it was random objectives and you only get one card, and that's your entire objective for the game, right? So I feel like you need options, and that's why I really find the tactical objective cards in the new edition of 40K really compelling, because you have three objectives, and depending on the mission, sometimes more, you have three objectives at any one time, and you can spend your resources, your CP, to swap them out to even have more options. So even if you get dealt a bad hand, you have some way of hand management to work through that and try to find some things that you can take advantage of. And even sometimes it's not even about the winning. It's just about having the opportunity to feel like you're doing something constructive. So even if I'm going to lose to my opponent, but if I'm scoring a couple points a turn, at least I'm feeling like I'm giving him a good game and I'm doing some things that are entertaining and I'm giving myself little mini objectives to go for. So I do like, I don't know if we've I think Craig made a good point that maybe we've strayed into just good game design versus luck mitigation. But I do like having a secondary or tertiary objective. I think those are great. And I do think there should be something more than tabling your... I really don't like playing a game, and this always happens when you're learning a game. People are like, let's just play no mission and just kill each other. And
mission kill each other.
I never like those.
The Games Workshop classic.
I hate those games because they're not, to your point earlier about realism, no one's fighting that, right? And that's very rarely the actual objective in a mission. The actual objective is take that hill or repel that invader or get this cargo to safety or whatever. There's always something going on that's at least... So it doesn't... Even in a game where the objective doesn't make a lot of sense, like hold this point for half a turn and then get off of it, just having an objective at least makes it feel more interesting, right? And more compelling than just kill the guy. So...
Yeah, for sure.
And it makes a lot of interesting units more compelling, too. And you're not just... Because the other thing I always hated was in Theory Hammer, now I'm getting really old school, but in Theory Hammer, people would be like, that piece isn't worth its points because if you do the math, it can't kill your opponent's points fast enough to make itself worth it in 6 turns, right?
Yep.
But as soon as you introduce mission objectives, that all goes out the window. Because now the piece could be about doing no killing at all, but just getting somewhere fast, right?
Definitely.
Or getting somewhere sneaky. And I think that stuff's a lot more interesting tactically than just killing stuff. That's just me. What do I know?
No. I think you're 100% right. And that's one of the things, again, with the design work that was done in Warcradle was, with Exodus, was we deliberately, and so there are some people who Exodus kind of infuriates because we've deliberately built into the game things that, so for example, I mentioned about the fixed probability in the deck. And so it's building towards something. However, because we know that there will be some people who effectively almost count the cards kind of thing, so that they really try and heavily game it, as it were. We make sure that you burn, not literally, but you dump off, you discard 3. Once you've shuffled it, you discard 3 cards off the top of the deck, face down, sight unseen. Wow. So there are things in there that stop people from, even though there are those elements of randomness that stop people from being able to take it that far. And like we were talking about, where luck mitigation goes too far and actually then becomes a barrier to fortune going into somebody's way, because you've kind of planned it out and you've gamed it out and you've theory hammered it enough that you can, that's statistically that's not going to happen. So you know what? In fact, buddy, let's not even play the game. Let's just sit there. You say what you're going to do. I say what I would then do. You then say what you were going to do. I then tell you what I was going to do.
Right.
We can work out how the game would have gone. We don't even need to get the models out of the case. It's a crazy notion. So that's where I think luck has a really important part to play in a game, because you know what? On paper, you're right. That thing wouldn't earn its points back. But you know what? It's rolling 6s all day long, and so it rinses your guy that's supposed to be almost unkillable, because you know what? You just keep rolling 1s.
That's why you play the game.
Yeah, and that's where. So having more unpredictability with the ability to kind of couch it a little bit in your favour, but I think a game still needs a strong streak of unpredictability, a bit of chaos that a smart player will try and work with, but that ultimately, you know what, if the chaos of the game runs away from you and you get kind of swept away in it, you know what, sometimes that happens. I think that does happen in real life too, so I'm okay with that.
I think you're absolutely right, and just to bring it all home, just enough chaos to build a ladder, right, Craig?
Oh, look at that.
Stuart, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule there and cranking out awesome new Wild West Exodus stuff.
All those different hats.
To join us here.
Wow.
If folks want to learn more about you and Warcradle and everything else, where should they go on the internets to find out more?
Well, you can Facebook stalk me if you want to learn about me and my children and my family, but I'd advise against that. We do have fairly strong privacy laws here in the UK. But if you want to learn more about Wild West Exodus, you can hop along to the Dark Council Facebook group. There's loads of people talking about the game, some of them complimentary. There's also a whole bunch of resources on. You can download the whole game for free. At wildwestexodus.com. We've got a big launch going on for the game. The new version of the latest edition of the game comes out at the end of September, and we've got on various social media channels. Apparently, there are others other than the D6 generation, and there's a theme week coming up and all sorts of stuff. So you're going to get pretty sick of seeing me in places, because I'm going to be pushing myself out and making sure that I spread the good news of Wild West Exodus as far as I can see, because I think it's a great game. It's not just about cowboys, although you might think it was, as it's got Wild West in the title, but I promise you there's more to it than that. And I know there's a lot of really creative, talented people, and Craig, who have contributed to Wild West Exodus, and have really, Craig's done a cracking job, and really kind of shaped something I think that is a bit special. So yeah, by all means, Dark Council is a good social place. It's a community page to meet on it, but failing that, pretty much Wild West Exodus. Type that into your search engine, and you will find all sorts of fiendish, corrupted things to get stuck into.
Excellent, Stuart. Well, thank you so much again, and it was a pleasure to have you on the show. And please let us know when the next new hotness is coming out, so we can call you back on. We'd love to have you back.
Oh no, it'd be a pleasure to come back. It's been good fun.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Stuart.
All right, take care, guys.
Talk to you later. Bye bye. All of our friends over at Patreon, the men, the women, the boys, the girls, the dogs, the cats, the infinite variety of life in all of its many shapes and sizes, who help us keep the not-so-horrible vibes flowing. Today I would like to thank Greg Barlow, David Bartley, Eric Beeson, Scott Bercuda, and Brian Berman. Thank you, guys. And if I said your name incorrectly or strangely, that's mainly because I know you and or have met you in the past. I believe. Maybe. I don't know. Anyway, thank you sincerely for helping us keep the lights on and keep the show flowing. And if you haven't done that, go ahead and check it out. And maybe you can help us keep things going, keep things trucking. Did you ever notice how some people are terribly, terribly afraid of change? I think most people have some aversion to change. I think that is common psychology, and I think the more comfortable people are, or people were as they were developing psychologically, the more adverse most of them are to change. I am very adverse to change. I don't deal with change well, whether it's good change or bad change. I just, as soon as I have to readjust and adapt to things, I get all kerfluffled and all wrapped up in all kinds of craziness and confusion. And I know that, and I know that it rattles me, and I do my absolute best to keep that in mind. So whenever anybody suggests some new way of doing things, I always get nervous, but I try to keep in mind that I am change averse. This summer, there's been a lot of change, and it's been kind of a tough summer. Not for any, I guarantee you there are billions of people on the planet that had a much tougher summer than I am. I'm not even going to really discuss the changes with you because many of you listening, in fact, probably have dealt with a lot more difficult things than I've dealt with, short of there's been some medical issues with my family. But aside from that, the real change is all kinds of different circumstances that people have found themselves in. And I'm aware that, that's all kinds of different bits and pieces and odds and ends, and you've got to adjust and adapt, and I'm just not very good at it. But it's all culminating now in Gen Con. Gen Con, as you know, is a really, really, really big convention in Indianapolis, and this year they've actually changed it by limiting the number of tickets. In fact, specific day tickets, I believe Saturday was sold out over a month ago. And so it's going to be big. Now they're opening the stadium up. Even the playing field of the stadium, I believe, this year is open. So that's a lot of space to open up on top of everything else. So hopefully it won't feel too crowded. And last year they were pretty good with controlling the flow of people so that you didn't feel like it was overwhelming. But it's going to be very strange for me this year, because there's a huge change. Well, there's several huge changes. One, I've got several meetings that I'm very excited about. I'm very excited to meet friends that I haven't seen in a very long time, and business associates. There's a lot going on, so that's all exciting. The main change for me is that most of our local game group is not going to Gen Con this year. So the family Ahern, I believe, is going. And, of course, most of the Wakelands, although not all of them, they're leaving. One daughter is doing something else, so she won't be with them. Although she got a pretty good what do you call it when there's a consolation prize? Oof, that was a painful brain cramp. But anyway. Yeah, so it's all gonna be fairly different. Matt from the Nerd Herders is the only guy, the regular Tuesday guy crowd that's coming, other than Russ. So most of the guys that I hang out with, because Russ is usually with his family, most of the guys that I hang out with for the length of Gen Con are not going to be there, and I'm nervous. A, because I don't deal well with change. And B, I could have quite as easily done a social anxiety Did You Ever Notice, except that I'm not really going to go there too deeply, although that is something that I, as many gamers, have to deal with on one level or another. And so I'm a little nervous. I'm leaving for Gen Con in just 3 days. So by the time most of you are listening to this, either I'm there or it's already over, because it's also very strange to me. A lot goes into our Gen Con. A lot of planning has to happen before we go. We have to plan out what game we're playing for the play-by mob. We have to come up with, Russ does a lot of that work, the lion's share of that work, but there's still some concept stuff. And Did You Ever Know? Rapid fire, sorry. So there's a lot of preparation that goes into that. There's a lot of personal psychological preparation that goes into that. That's not something that happens to me easily. It's very intimidating to me to be in a big giant crowd like that and then have people, I love when people come up to me, but at the same time I feel awkward because A, I don't remember anybody's name from one year to the next ever. And B, well, this year I've got this weird thing with my ear. So if you say something to me and I don't react, it's not that I'm ignoring you. It's actually most likely that I can't hear you. So especially in a crowd. So that's another whole thing that's going to be very intriguing and a little nerve rattling to me, unless I use it. That could be just wander blindly or deafly, as the case may be, through the vendor hall, unable to hear anything. That would be intriguing. But anyway, so that's what's going on in my head right now as I prepare for Gen Con. There's all this other stuff, but on top of this, I've got all kinds of awesome offers. Like Terrace has offered to let me hang around with the Geek Nation Tours guys, and the Games and Gears guys have asked me to go hang out with them, and I'm hoping, to meet up with the Steam Forged Games guys again, and the Blood and Plunder guys, and a bunch of other guys as well. I'm going to swing by the Fantasy Flight area. A lot of people that I work with there. Of course, I Ross Watson, Dean. There's a whole bunch of people who are hopefully going to be there and that I'll bump into at one point or another. Bob, Adam, who knows? There's a whole bunch of you. Dan, I'm not going to keep going. Father, nope, just going to keep going. But you know who you are. So, yeah. So that's me, and that's what I don't know exactly. I'm flying out by myself, which actually I think I did last year. But that's compared to doing a road trip with 6 other guys, that's a change right there. So it's going to be interesting. I don't know. I need to go for my peanut butter burger. I don't know who I'm going to go with I don't know. There's a whole bunch of stuff I don't know. So it'll be intriguing. The interesting thing is the next Did You Ever Notice that I record will be after all of this. So maybe I'll let you know how it all went. And as I'm thinking about this, there are definitely problems to have. And if you're going to have a problem not knowing what's going to happen when you get to Gen Con, that's a pretty good problem to have. So I think I'm okay. I think that's all I've got to say for that about that right now. So thanks for listening, and
Achievement unlocked! You've made it to the end of another D6 Generation episode, the podcast whose humor has universally been acclaimed as not too horrible. Please let us know what you thought of the show by either emailing us at info@thed6generation.com or by posting in our official D6G episode thread at the top of the DACA discussions forum on DACA.com. If for some inexplicable reason you actually enjoyed this show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. See you in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening, and happy gaming.
The theme from Total Fangirl comes from the soundtrack of The Last Night on Earth, the zombie game, courtesy of Flying Frog Productions, and is a composition of Mary Beth Magalanes.
That's confusion, then. You guys are spoiling me.
Oh, yeah, sure. We have lots of...
We live in a state of confusion, so sometimes we don't even recognize it.
Exactly.
I know, me too. I'm like, this is a vacation. Like, everyone's on time. This is amazing.
That's when they go to vacation and you're on time. That's a little strange, but okay, sure. We'll go with that.